Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, welcome to Robservations, the show about something. I am, of course, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, the Master of Fun and Wonder, the so many different things. I mean, somebody recently said that this was the NPR for geeks. I'll take that. I think that's fantastic. I just like being the existential Mr. Rogers. Once again, it's me, Robert Meyer Burnett, here with another episode of Robservations along with a ride is you imagination connoisseurs, you members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. And as you know, these shows are brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com, you can punch in a code and get 20% off your order. So when you check out, what do? You punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity. You get 20% off your order. Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products make great Christmas gifts, great stocking stuffers, and head on over there. You can also use the code IMC20 for Imagination Connoisseur 20. And if you do that, it's even better for the channel for the month of December. So head on over to getluckytiger.com, buy some cool stuff. And as you all know, we are still giving away bottles up through Christmas of Lucky Tiger body wash, head to tail, as they call it, head to tail body wash. And apparently we have, I have two that I've given away, and I don't know the names yet. How remiss am I? I am remiss. But anyway, we're going to find that out. It's Sunday. It is December 1st, 2019. My God, I can't believe it's December. You know what that means? That means at the end of this month, I will have been doing these shows for a year. My first year anniversary. OMG. It's amazing to me that I'm still here. It's amazing to me you're still here, that all these people they keep coming. Slowly but surely, we're growing. The Post-Geek Singularity is it's growing every day. And that reminds me, hit like, subscribe. That's always a good thing for your fellow YouTubers, not just me, but anybody you love on YouTube. By the way, you know, some of my favorite YouTube channels, Justin's Collection. He basically just shows hot toys. It's like the greatest YouTube channel ever. Head on over to Justin's Collection. Watch his stuff if you like those kinds of things. He's one of my favorite YouTubers. Also, Critical Drinker, another YouTuber I dig, has a really good review he just dropped of Ford v Ferrari. What's great about Critical Drinker is, well, he's really smart, and I like his analysis of films, but a lot of the time he's angry about things, same things I'm usually angry about, but when he comes out swinging in favor of something, it'll always put a smile on your face. And if you've already seen Ford v Ferrari, watch his review. If you haven't seen Ford v Ferrari, watch his review because it'll convince you to do so. So thank you, Critical Drinker. I'm a big fan. As many people might know or might not know, a little bit of controversy happened surrounding Frank Miller's upcoming one-shot. Frank Miller, of course, the great comic artist who is renowned for his work on Daredevil, Ronin, and of course, the seminal Dark Knight Returns. He is doing a new one-shot comic called The Dark Knight Returns, The Golden Child. Now, DC Comics released an image. Well, let me just read this article. This is by Bruce Herring. It was on Deadline this morning at 8:41 a.m. And first of all, you can see in the thumbnail of this chat, you can actually see the piece of art in question. A DC Comics ad promoting its title, The Dark Knight Returns, The Golden Child, has been taken down from at least one official social media account after China supporters claimed it subtly backed Hong Kong protesters. The ad in question featured the cover art from the forthcoming book featuring Batman throwing a Molotov cocktail, which has been a key tool of the Hong Kong activists in their battles with police. It also said, "The future is young," which aggrieved China supporters saw as a salute to the protester demographics, largely college age. The poster was subsequently taken down from Twitter and Instagram by DC Comics. That sparked a counter-protest by those who support the Hong Kong protesters. The controversial cover art will reportedly remain on the book when it is released on December 11th. I'm actually excited for it. I thought The Dark Knight 3, The Master Race, was quite good. Really looking forward to this. The poster and the title in question are part of a one-shot comic written by Frank Miller and illustrated by artist Raphael Grampa. The storyline focuses on Jonathan Kent, the son of Superman and Wonder Woman. So that's sort of interesting. Now, as many of you know, there have been Hong Kong protests going on for quite some time. And I figured, I was like, okay, I kind of get the protests. I kind of understood what was going on, but I figured, you know what, if I'm going to talk about this, why don't I look into this and get a nice explanation for those who might not know. This was on BBC News on November 28th. Now, it doesn't say who wrote this article, but I will read this. Hong Kong protests started in June against plans to allow extradition to mainland China. The extradition bill, which triggered the first protest, was introduced in April. It would have allowed for criminal suspects to be extradited to mainland China under certain circumstances. Opponents said this risked exposing Hong Kongers to unfair trials and violent treatment. They also argued that the bill would give China greater influence over Hong Kong and could be used to target activists and journalists. Hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets. After weeks of protests, leader Carrie Lam eventually said the bill would be suspended indefinitely. Protesters feared the bill could be revived, so demonstrations continued, calling for it to be withdrawn completely. By then, clashes between police and protesters had become more frequent and violent. In September, the bill was finally withdrawn, but protesters said this was too little, too late. On the 1st of October, while China was celebrating 70 years of Communist Party rule, Hong Kong experienced one of its most violent and chaotic days. An 18-year-old was shot in the chest with a live bullet as protesters fought officers with poles, petrol bombs, and other projectiles. The government then banned protesters wearing face masks, and in early November, a pro-Beijing lawmaker was stabbed in the street by a man pretending to be a supporter. 1 week later, a policeman shot one protester at close range when activists were trying to set up a roadblock. Later that day, another man was set on fire by anti-government protesters. In November, a standoff between police and students barricaded on the campus of Hong Kong's Polytechnic University became another defining moment. Later that month, the territory held local council elections that were seen as a barometer of public opinion. The vote saw a landslide victory for the pro-democracy movement, with 17 of 18 councils now controlled by pro-democracy councillors. Tallulah, what do protesters want? Some protesters have adopted the model 5 demands, not one less. These are for the protests not to be characterized as a riot, amnesty for arrested protesters, an independent inquiry into alleged police brutality, implementation of complete universal suffrage. The 5th demand, the withdrawal of the bill, has already been met. Protesters supporting the Hong Kong movement have spread across the globe, with rallies taking place in the UK, France, United States, Canada, and Australia. In many cases, people supporting the demonstrators were confronted by pro-Beijing rallies. Chinese President Xi, I'm sure Willow will correct me. Xi Jinping has warned against separatism, saying any attempt to divide China would end in bodies smashed and bones ground to powder. Hong Kong is a former British colony handed back to China in 1997. It has its own judiciary and separate legal system from mainland China. Those rights include freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. But those freedoms, the basic law, expire in 2047, and it is not clear what Hong Kong's status will then be. I thought that's pretty interesting. I have to say, I've always been fascinated by China as a country, and especially what basically it's kind of it's turning into this sci-fi dystopia. Not that it already wasn't, but I mean the things that the Chinese can do. Because they can whenever they want to, are amazing with the population and with they can just do all kinds of craziness. But what I think is most important here and what sort of bothers me is that basically China has, I mean, I'm not the most politically aware guy in the world. I'll say that right now. And I don't understand necessarily the intricacies of everything going on in the South China Sea. Unless you're asking me about Tomorrow Never Dies, I can explain to you what Jonathan Pryce's character was trying to do. The only good news is bad news. But when it comes to the entertainment industry and when it comes to all the things that we love, China has become a major player. Not always for the benefit of everyone. Clearly, it's huge emerging markets in terms of film is very important to Hollywood. Whether or not when movies open and make the money they make, whether they get that money, whether Hollywood gets the money is another thing entirely. And also, China has made various deals. Paramount Pictures might have something to say about deals that it's made with China that don't pan out. However, the market is too big. There's too much money. We are inexorably tied to China, for better or for worse. And it's sort of interesting to watch these things happen. Now, it's not like Frank Miller's The Dark Knight series is known for being a light, airy, all sunny and moonbeams look at modern society. And the idea that someone's throwing Molotov cocktails is certainly not something that's unusual in the pages of The Dark Knight. I mean, all the way back to The Dark Knight Returns back in 86, 33 years ago, there was gangs taking over the city. There were people throwing Molotov cocktails. There was all kinds of violence. Batman basically drove a tank. And this is not unexpected. What is unexpected is when you watch somebody or a company like DC Comics, which is a part of Warner Brothers, that is now doing, I mean, they won't allow the Joker to be released in China. And yet, because pro-Chinese forces or pro-Chinese factions protested an ad. Now, keep in mind, I would imagine that, of course, maybe somebody thought The Golden Child is a reference to the Eddie Murphy movie and it had something to do with China. But the idea that the phrase "the future is young," and you have Batman throwing a Molotov cocktail, it's a pretty big leap to say that it really has anything to do with protesters in Hong Kong. Molotov cocktails are a time-worn tradition amongst urban people that participate in urban uprisings. And what I found distressing about the whole thing is, where does it end? I mean, we are a pro-democratic nation. We are a democratic republic. And I understand that there's a lot of money tied up in China. But are we now going to bow to pressure? Are we going to see our own freedom of speech or our own ability to advertise a comic book is going to be curtailed by Chinese pressure? I find that distressing because tomorrow, who knows what they're gonna take away from us, or what is our ability? I mean, when are we going to take these stands? And by the way, I mean, they have a lot of paper on the United States. If they want to cash it in, we're going to be in trouble. And we now live in a world where our moves, all of the countries of the world have to consider that what they do has global implications. But when I see something like this, when I see, DC Comics is pulling an ad that is hardly, it's not exactly surprising, nor was this ad any different from any other Frank Miller. I mean, if you know anything about Frank Miller, I mean, come on, this is typical Frank Miller material. So now an ad is going to be pulled off social media because somebody is bowing to Chinese pressure, that an image of somebody throwing a Molotov cocktail, which it could be representative of any kind of social uprising over the last, I don't even know when the Molotov cocktail was invented, but it's been around my entire life. It's not something, I'm sure, as soon as they started using lamp oil and people were lamplighters, somebody figured out, oh, we can put this oil in a bottle and throw it. It's been around for a long time. So this idea that suddenly China has decided, or certain pro-Chinese people decided to say that, oh, this particular ad is a direct reference to what's going on in Hong Kong. And by the way, I'm sure that it was in Frank Miller's mind, just as every revolution was probably in Frank Miller's mind when he drew this image. I don't think it necessarily was about Hong Kong per se, or it could have been, but I doubt it. But Frank Miller is always about the push and pull. I mean, at least his Dark Knight has always been about the push and pull in our society. And this is not unusual. So it's strange to me that now people are so fearful of the business that we're doing, with, whether we're in a trade war with them or whatever, that we are willing to give up our freedoms so quickly when someone just says, I mean, when does it end? Are the covers of every book that comes out, or is the content in movies? Now, it is no on one hand, there's times when, like, I loved in Ridley Scott's movie The Martian, which I think is one of my favorite movies of the last 10 years. Definitely. It's on my list of my favorite top 25 movies of the last decade. The Martian is definitely on it. And I liked in that film that it was the Chinese that came to the aid of Matt Damon, and the mission. And that made sense. It made sense. And in a way, I get it. It was probably a very pointed, very deliberate thing. I have not read Andy Weir's book, so I don't know if that's the same as in the book. Maybe it is, because it makes sense. But in the movie, clearly, they go a long way in that film toward making sure that the Chinese are very, very heroic. And the same was true also of Arrival, which I find very interesting. And clearly, we're seeing Chinese influence in our entertainment. Now, hey, Hot Toys are manufactured in Hong Kong. And as I've been talking about actually, they're probably manufactured in mainland China. I'm not actually sure, but Hot Toys is based in Hong Kong. But I've been talking about cities like Shenzhen and AI documentaries I've been watching, and a lot of this stuff is Chinese based. And it's really interesting to me. And I don't fear it per se, but I do think that we have to be ever vigilant and mindful. Again, I mean, we can't even keep our own house in order. So maybe with until our own government can function correctly, then maybe worrying about China is something that is secondary. But I found this really interesting, that it became a story and that DC Comics capitulated to this kind of pressure. And to me, I see it purely, it's censorship. And I understand you have the communist regime in China. It's basically a totalitarian, authoritarian regime. And they don't have, I mean, in Hong Kong, they're fighting for democracy because they've had democracy, even when it was handed over in 97, as I just read about to you guys, what the certain things that have remained in place, and they just had their elections, and it was resoundingly democratic, the outcome. But we're the United States, and we've got DC Comics pulling ads off of social media because somebody is worried about how the Chinese government may look at an image of Batman throwing a Molotov cocktail. I mean, you know what? It wasn't. I don't remember Russian protests or anybody pulling ads for Superman Red Sun or things like that. Maybe that was different. I'm sure the Russians would have loved to have had Superman land in Soviet Russia, but it's just something to be mindful of, something to watch. It's interesting. I don't know. I've received more insight into what it's like to be Chinese and to have left the country from Willow Yang's letters. So it's very interesting. Maybe she'll write a letter about this. Maybe she can illuminate that or find out what her parents would have to say. I don't know. But for me, this just struck me as being, it's worrisome, but it's sort of it's strange to me. It's strange that they would do this. I mean, what would be the harm in saying no? But what could be the harm is the economic realities of suddenly maybe China is going to ban the sale of DC Comics and not allow, especially when the Joker is not allowed to be shown in China. And yet they're bowing from Chinese pressure to take down an ad. It's like, all right, we'll take it down. At least get something. Let's talk about quid pro quo. How about allow Joker to open and see what people say? Of course, they're not going to, because basically the entire Joker movie is the exact same thing as I'm sure this one image of Batman throwing a Molotov cocktail is as well. So it's just ironic to me. And it's just something to think about. I mean, what do you guys think about on a Sunday morning? This is what I wake up and think about. You have a little bit more insight into how my thought process works. By the way, look at this snazzy shirt. I have to say, the Meyer Shop First shirt. This is, of course, Bill Hunt's from the Digital Bits. It's his shirt. I love this shirt. It came from TeePublic. I really like TeePublic's shirts. I'm happy to tell you to go over there and look up Robservations or Robert Meyer Burnett. You can get Imagination Connoisseur swag yourself, but I'm happy to support a friend of mine who also has a shirts. Now, there's something else about China that I've been fascinated by, and I figured I'd throw this in there. Of course, people have heard that there's anybody who's watched Black Mirror knows that in a very Black Mirror-esque turn of events, in China, they have a social credit system. And an article from, let's see, when was this? This was, there was an article by Louise, let's see, Louise Mansakis. I actually like one of my favorite magazines of all time, right up there with Omni. It has always been Wired. And I've been reading Wired for, 30 years, I think. And one of the things that I love about Wired is it's been on the cutting edge of our culture. At first, it seemed so distant, but now, when I started reading it, but now Wired is one of my go-to sites. I still like buying the physical magazine when I can, but I really enjoy Wired's content a lot. It's one of my favorite destination spots on the web. But they did an article about the social credit system that's happening in China. And I just wanted to read a little bit. I won't read the whole article, but I want to read a little bit of it. In October 2018, Vice President Mike Pence paid a visit to Hudson Institute, a conservative Washington, D.C. think tank, to give a wide-ranging speech about the United States' relationship with China. Standing stiffly in a shiny blue tie, he began by accusing the Chinese Communist Party of interfering in U.S. politics and directing Chinese businesses to steal American intellectual property by any means necessary. Pence then turned his attention to the country's human rights abuses, starting not with the persecution of religious minorities, but with a particular governmental initiative, the Social Credit Project. By 2020, China's rulers aim to implement an Orwellian system premised on controlling virtually every facet of human life, the so-called social credit score, Pence said. In the words of that program's official blueprint, it will allow the trustworthy to roam everywhere under heaven while making it hard for the discredited to take a single step. The vice president's remarks echoed a steady stream of Western media reports published in dozens of outlets over the past few years that paint China's social credit system as a dystopian nightmare straight out of Black Mirror. The articles and broadcast segments often said China's central government is using a futuristic algorithm to compile people's social media connections, buying histories, location data, and more into a single score dictating their rights and freedoms. The government can supposedly analyze footage from hundreds of millions of facial recognition-equipped surveillance cameras in real time and then dock you points for misbehavior like jaywalking or playing too many video games. But there is no single all-powerful score assigned to every individual in China, at least not yet. The official blueprint Pence referenced is a planning document released by China's chief administrative body 5 years ago. It calls for the establishment of a nationwide scheme for tracking the trustworthiness of everyday citizens, corporations, and government officials. The Chinese government and state media say the project is designed to boost public confidence and fight problems like corruption and business fraud. Western critics often see social credit instead as an intrusive surveillance apparatus for punishing dissidents and infringing on people's privacy. With just over a year to go until the government's self-imposed deadline for establishing the laws and regulations governing social credit, Chinese legal researchers say the system is far from cutting edge, Big Brother apparatus portrayed in the West's popular imagination. I really think you would find a much larger percentage of Americans are aware of Chinese social credit than you would find Chinese people are aware of Chinese social credit, says Jeremy Dom, a senior research fellow at Yale's law school Paul Tsai China Center in Beijing. The system as it exists today is more a patchwork of regional pilots and experimental projects with few indications about what could be implemented at a national scale. That's not to say that fears about social credit are entirely unfounded. The Chinese government is already using new technologies to control its citizens in frightening ways. The internet is highly censored, and each person's cell phone number and online activity is assigned a unique ID number tied to their real name. Facial recognition technology is also increasingly widespread in China, with few restraints on how it can be used to track and surveil citizens. The most troubling abuses are being carried out in the western province of Zhejiang, where human rights groups and journalists say the Chinese government is detaining and surveilling millions of people from the minority Muslim Uyghur population on nearly unprecedented scales. But Western concerns about what could happen with China's social credit system have in some ways outstripped discussions about what's already really occurring. Critiques are often based on worst-case scenarios far off in the future and run the risk of minimizing the troubling aspects of the project as it is in place today. The exaggerated portrayals may also help to downplay surveillance efforts in other parts of the world. Because China is often held up as an extreme of one end of the spectrum, I think that it moves the goalposts for the whole conversation, says Daum, so that anything less invasive than our imagined version of social credit seems sort of acceptable, because at least we're not as bad as China. Now, this article goes on, and it's fascinating to read. I'm going to put that in the live chat right now. Here is a link to that article. Now, here's my, when I read that stuff, and again, I was talking about Russian hacking and troll farms that they utilize in the 2016 elections. And make no mistake, all of this is all going on all of the time. Like, we are already in a surveillance state. We choose to, if we want to admit that we are or not, the future is coming right at us. We are like people tied to a train, and it's going to drive right over us. And what's really interesting, I find it sort of strange that all of this, I guess we'd call it future shock, it's all happening. It's all happening all over the place, all around us. Whether it's like Willow wrote about CRISPR technology, gene splicing, designer babies, whether it's our surveillance state, all of these things are happening. And yet, I don't know. It's like we're not paying attention. I was talking about the David Cronenberg project, Crimes of the Future. It's just funny to me, reading a lot of cutting edge sci-fi. I mean, the Chung Kuo series of books about the rise of the Chinese empire and how they basically run the world. There's a reason why in Firefly, basically, we never really saw how it all worked, but it was the Chinese that ran the planet. All of these things are happening. And, while our government is busy with impeachment hearings and half of our government since Trump took over remains unstaffed, it's just strange because there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we just don't seem to be doing it. We're constantly distracted by other things. I mean, like I said, kudos to the Russians for figuring out a way to disrupt the American fabric of life by not firing a shot. They can just sit in their troll farms and dump stuff out on social media. All you have to do is look at the comments section on somebody talking about the Snyder Cut. It wouldn't surprise me. I look at people when it comes to the Snyder Cut, and I look at some of the people that come after me with their 15 followers or whatever. I'm like, interesting. I mean, you can start dissent over anything you want. I mean, my God, whether it's I did read once that there was a lot of troll farms just sowing dissent over The Last Jedi, because why not? Why not? Any way you can divide people about anything is always helpful to sort of weaken the fabric of our society. Because ultimately, it's very funny to me when people are saying you can see Trump supporters wearing T-shirts that say, I'd rather be a communist or I'd rather be in Russia than be a Democrat. I mean, I would say that's a huge victory for the Russians. Good for them, because they're good at what they do, and we should be the ones that are ever vigilant, and we should be the ones that are coming back and hitting hard. And whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, like I always say, whether you like Star Wars, The Last Jedi or not, we are at the bottom. The baseline should be we're all Americans, and here we're all imagination connoisseurs. So my whole thing is that, hey, let's learn as much as we can, but always remember that even if we disagree, that we all love the same stuff. Being an imagination connoisseur is to ultimately love all this stuff. Now, you don't have to love everything as much as the next guy. There are things I love that you're not going to love, but ultimately we have to keep a place. I mean, the whole point of my show is to be able to have a place where people come, and we should be able to express our ideas without, coming to blows. If you like The Last Jedi, great. I was watching The Last Jedi. I watched it's the one movie we haven't watched, The Last Jedi and Solo, in Elizabeth's rewatch of all the Star Wars movies in the lead up to The Rise of Skywalker. I was watching it today, and while I think some of the humor is a little goofy, there's interesting stuff in it. I went and saw Knives Out last night. Now, I liked it. I didn't love it. I was a little bit perplexed, actually, by the latter half of the film that seemed to sort of abandon many of the characters that I found delightful. It's a beautifully made movie. I like the fact that Rian Johnson went from making a movie that was huge, massive in scope with The Last Jedi, and then went back and basically made a film that's set in one big house. I think that's always good for a filmmaker to do that. My favorite filmmakers don't always just work in one genre. They can change it up and work in any genre. But, I ultimately think that we have very interesting questions that are staring us, or maybe we're staring into the barrel of them. And I think we have an obligation to one another and to our own futures to keep our eyes open and really learn about the issues and learn how to talk to one another without turning it into a knockdown, drag out fight. Whether you are a Republican or whether you're a Democrat or an independent or whatever your religious beliefs are. I mean, we're all stuck on this planet together. I think it's always better if you're open-minded and have a reason or have the ability to listen to someone else. I mean, as I always sign off, every person has a story to tell you have yet to hear, or every person has an opinion that you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And one of the things I've liked about this community, for the most part, if you go to the Facebook page, the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page, or you engage on Twitter, I've had a pretty great experience with everybody. A lot of people have come to me and said, I feel that I can come here and share things with you. I mean, even people like Mark C., who's been a longtime supporter of this channel, both via super chats and also writing some great letters. He's written some controversial stuff that people haven't always agreed with, things I haven't always agreed with, but at least he presents his opinions in I think thoughtful, constructive ways. And I'm happy to be a conduit to share ideas that aren't necessarily always the most popular, but as long as we can talk about them, I think that's what's our greatest strength. And when I watch and see, it's strange to me that you hear about somebody being upset about an image. We have a lot of that around us. We have a lot of certain factions, certain religious factions won't allow images of their prophet, and people have died because of it. And I find that so strange. It's not something that I agree with. And I'm hoping as we move forward, I mean, certainly in this space, we're very, very fortunate. We're very, very fortunate to live in the time that we're living in. Humanity is better off. I always talk about Yuval Harari's book Sapiens, and I highly recommend this holiday season read the books Sapiens and his follow-up Homo Deus. And I highly recommend reading both of those books. It will make you feel better. I think about being a human being, and I think, why shouldn't we? Being a human being is pretty great. And being an imagination connoisseur is even better if you're that kind of a human being. And it's good to have you here. So anyway, I guess in the as I'm sort of leaving or descending down from the tryptophan high of Thursday, I've just been taking stock of what we're doing. And I think, for the most part, there's so many cool, interesting things that are happening. Of course, there's a lot of bad things as well, but we have the ability and the tools and the technology. I'm actually pretty excited to see where humanity is going to go, at least in the short time I have left, because as you all know, I am quickly, I got one foot in the grave. What can I say? Anyway, there you go. That's what I wanted to say to you guys this morning. And now let's jump back into what people have to say. I missed a super chat yesterday from Stubble McShave. He wrote Garage CD to be called the Bridge or the Techno Core. Um, oh, my garage. Yes. What he's saying, Stubble McShave is saying, as you all know, I'm moving on to a new set, my Robservations set, where I'm going to do the show. The production value is going to skyrocket. Now, Stubble McShave has suggested, I said, what names? One of my moderators suggested the Robservatory, which I really like, the Robservatory. It's pretty funny. It goes, but Stubble McShave suggests the Bridge or the Techno Core. Yeah, I mean, I like that. The Techno Core is, of course, from Hyperion, the book Hyperion, which I really like. Although I don't know if that, and the Bridge is too Star Trekky, and I want this to be for everyone. But the Robservatory, I'm digging that. Nick Garula is here. Nick Garula says, check out the movies that made us on Netflix. As I talked about yesterday, I've watched the movies that made us, at least 2 episodes. I highly recommend it. It's a very entertaining show. The movies that made us comes from the same people that made the toys that made us. And their first 4 episodes are about Dirty Dancing, Ghostbusters, Die Hard, and Home Alone. And I'll tell you an interesting story about my own past and how I got my first job in Hollywood, even before I worked on Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. So when I was at USC, I was taking a course. I've told the story before, but I'll tell again. But it reminded me because anyway, the movies that made us reminded me of this because the person that gave me the job is one of the people interviewed because he was the executive producer of Home Alone. So I was taking a 2-credit course at USC, a Tuesday night course called the Visiting Artist Seminar with Max Lamb. Max Lamb was a teacher. It was a 2-credit course. It wasn't a big course. And basically all it was is that Max Lamb would bring in people that worked in the industry and have them speak. Now, this was back in 88, 89. And I figured, okay, well, if they're going to come in and speak, I would do a little bit of research before whatever the guest speaker was, I would go. And sometimes I went to the Motion Picture Academy library that is on, I think it's on La Cienega now. Or I would go do research in the Doheny Library or the Cinema School Library at USC and try and get some information about our guests. Well, there were 2 producers, Mark Levinson and Scott Rosenfeld, who were coming to speak at Max Lamb's class. They had recently produced Mystic Pizza. That was, of course, Julia Roberts' breakthrough movie before Pretty Woman. And so I went, and they also had produced a science fiction film called Stranded that I knew some of the visual effects people that worked on that. So when they came to class, I always had a list of questions to ask them because I figured, well, what a great opportunity. And other people that came to this class, director Joel Schumacher was one of them. Author George Clayton Johnson, who I was totally excited about because he'd not only written original Twilight Zone and Star Trek episodes, but he co-wrote with William F. Nolan the novel Logan's Run. And he also wrote or came up with the original Ocean's 11. And it was great to have these people come in. Well, so my asking questions to Mark and Scott, I wasn't the only one asking questions, but I asked a lot of questions. And the next morning, Max Lamb tracked me down at school, and he said that Mark Levinson and Scott Rosenfeld want to give you a job. And I said, you're kidding. And they're like, no, they want you to come work for their production company. Now, I was 21 years old, and I hadn't worked in Hollywood before. So my very first, it was an internship, and it wasn't paid. But what I got to do was they were up on Sunset Boulevard. Their offices were on Sunset Boulevard. They also had produced Teen Wolf was another film that they had produced. So Mystic Pizza and Teen Wolf. And I went up, and they were in the Atlantic Releasing Building, which was right by where the famous Marlboro Man was on Sunset Boulevard. And basically what they had me do, hello, Gilbert, was read screenplays. So it was the first time I read scripts for anyone. And that was the first time I was a story analyst, when what you do when you read scripts for production companies, you read the script and then you write what's called coverage. And coverage is a synopsis of the story, and then it's a page of analysis and recommendation. So I was able to read scripts, and the very first script that I ever found that I liked was by David Twohy, who made the Riddick movies later. And It was called The Grand Tour, and it was later made, I believe it might have been his directorial debut, but it was called The Grand Tour: Disaster in Time. I think Jeff Daniels is in it, and it was made for Showtime, a made for Showtime movie, I think. But that was the first script I ever read that I was like, wow, I love this. And I really was pushing it. I said, you guys should make this. And they looked into it. And what was a bummer was I think it was Atlantic Releasing that had released Teen Wolf, and they owed Mark Levinson and Scott Rosenfeld, they owed them $100,000 from Teen Wolf, and they couldn't pay it. So in not being able to pay it, they had to give up their office, and I lost my internship, and it went on for like 6 months, and it was great. I learned so much from them. They were very generous with their time, and they told me everything I needed to know about producing. It was very funny. And interestingly enough, when they were the executive producers of Home Alone, and I forgot this story, but when I was working at Warner Brothers, they had brought Home Alone to Warner Brothers, and Home Alone was a Warner Brothers movie, and it had moved into production. And Mark and Scott came to, as I said, I worked for the senior vice president of production at Warner Brothers, so I got to see them again. I hadn't seen them. This was not quite a year after I'd stopped interning for them, but it was great to see them in the executive offices at Warner Brothers. And they're like, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I work here." And they're like, "Of course you do." And it was great. It was great to have that kind of early start in my career, based on my knowledge and all that. But Scott Rosenfeld is he's interviewed in the movies that made us. And he talks about what happened and the story of how Home Alone was a Warner Brothers movie and how it became a 20th Century Fox movie was always an interesting story. And to be honest, I never understood when you watch the movies that made us, you find out this story, what happened, and you realize what a boneheaded move Warner Brothers made because of how successful Home Alone became. It was incredible. And even when I was there at the studio, I didn't understand it. I mean, it was crazy. But watch the episode. It's really, really interesting. And remember that Scott Rosenfeld, who's introduced, was the first guy to ever give me a job to recognize my genius. But it was. So, yeah. So check that out. Sister Harrow is here. She says, something for your tip jar. Enjoy your streams. Well, Sister Harrow, thank you very much. That's very much appreciated. It's very nice when people support the channel. I like hearing that positive feedback. And again, I think my streams and things are going to get even more interesting. At least you're going to have a theme song, which I think is really good. That was written by Axonar's Alexander Bornstein. So check it out. Jerem Mananen, Jer, am I saying it right? One day, finally watched The Greatest Showman. Great songs. Well, Jer, I loved The Greatest Showman. John Campea was the first person. It was a movie that totally passed me by. I was like, it just didn't float my boat, even though I loved Hugh Jackman. And because John Campea had turned me on to some of the songs and played them for me last year, I was like, well, I like the songs. Total impulse buy. I bought the Steelbook. There was one lonely Greatest Showman Steelbook at a Best Buy close to me. And it was an impulse buy. I bought it, took it home, and Elizabeth and I watched it. I loved it. Boy, do I love The Greatest Showman. What a great film that is. So, yes, indeed. Willow Yang is here. Willow Yang says, my parents are quite against the Chinese Communist government. It's one of the reasons they decided to come here. Yes, I can absolutely see that. The Chinese government and what they're able to do, basically, which is whatever they want, scares me to death. You know, the dystopian nature of it. It's strange to me that they've allowed commerce to boom and all that and bustle, but yet at any one moment, they could come and take it all away. This and their business practices, it's all very interesting to me, and I'm glad we have you here, Willow, because if you were still stuck in China, I don't think you'd be watching Star Trek episodes, or maybe you would be, but we wouldn't hear from you, and I feel very fortunate that we do. So tell your parents once again that China's loss is our gain, and it's good to have you, as you well know. Now, I've got a letter. This one comes from Darren Seeley, and I quite love this letter. Hello, Rob, and to all of the rest of the connoisseurs. The other day on your Robservations, someone asked you a question regarding what 5 books you would like to see adapted to a film or series. I thought it would be a neat time to share with you and the rest of the folks what my top 5 would be. Before I share my list, I want to explain a few parameters. I'm not counting or considering any book that is based on existing IP, such as Star Wars or a Star Trek novel. I wouldn't drop all at once. Anyhow, that's my honorable mention out of the way. This top 5 will surprise some of the connoisseurs because it is a list that may seem a bit unpredictable. It's in no specific order, and I don't necessarily love one over another. There's other books by some of these authors, such as Robert McCammon, who you mentioned the other day. Being a fan of such authors, I will only choose one. It is also not a preference over one book or another, but simply what I think could be more adaptable. I should also point out that because I hang out in many online screenwriting hubs and virtual workshops and do some writing of my own, 9 times out of 10, I'm thinking both as a fan and with my writer's cap. I'm always thinking, how would I adapt it? What is reasonable, or should we say what has more verisimilitude? It just can't look cool or be cool. You have to believe it. You have to be on board and not jump the ship, let alone the shark. First is Nighthawk. This was a paperback. By the way, I love when people write me articles or letters. I just love when people tell me what books they like, because I love books, and I can never get enough. So I love hearing recommendations. Nighthawk. This was a paperback I read back in the late 90s by an author named Patrick O'Connell. I really enjoyed it. It surprised me. It's what some would call a techno thriller, which basically means it's not so much about computers, but military jets and planes. The front cover has an F-15 Eagle over a New York City skyline. The premise is a U.S. pilot becomes unhinged and steals an F-15 on a mission to attack New York and Washington. Another pilot is chosen to stop the rogue pilot. In the book, get this, both the antagonist and protagonist are women pilots. It's pretty much nonstop action and suspense, and as I was reading it, I forgot they were female pilots, and visually, I'm seeing shades of Blue Thunder, the dogfight, and why hasn't anyone heard of this? Well, it was only a paperback, so it could have gotten overlooked, but 2 events in real life dated the book, that being 9/11 and the death of Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein. In the fictional novel, the enemy pilot, revealed to be a terrorist working for Hussein, attacks the World Trade Center. The novel was published in 1997. Obviously, if this book were to be adapted, those 2 things would be changed. But I'd keep the female pilot angle at all costs. I'm not woke. I just love a good read. Likewise, I would love a good movie. Maybe the action would be set in Houston or some other city. Hey, it sounds good to me. I mean, I like reading, I would call that airport fiction. I like reading a great airport novel. A novel that, and what's so funny to me is there's, like, I don't understand why a company like Blumhouse, which is having a great success on the $20 million or less model, especially when it comes to horror. I mean, I have many, many, many horror novels or lurid paperback novels. Grady Hendrix' book that came out a couple years ago, Paperbacks from Hell, of course, have made all those paperback books skyrocket in price. But I have a lot of them, from the 70s. A lot of great 70s and 80s horror paperbacks. And I don't understand why they're just not being adapted all the time, because obviously most of them have great stories. And I don't understand why movies like this aren't constantly being made. I don't get it. But anyway, because there's so many. I mean, if someone said to me, when I worked in development, I had already read so many books, and people would say, well, what should we make into a movie? And I'm like, well, here's 25 books I would say we should make into movies right now. I don't understand why that isn't happening, although it's happening more and more, as everyone knows, since Matt Reeves' company announced they're making Way Station. I'm like, oh my God. And they've just announced, of course, Rosa Salazar, who was Alita. She's starring in brand new Cherry Flavor. I have a first edition hardcover of that. That would have been just about the last. I mean, what that tells me, the fact that somebody is now making brand new Cherry Flavor, which is a horror novel, that they're making that movie, that they're making that series, proves that people that are my age, people that are working in Hollywood, are now going and getting books that they've read when they were younger, when they first came out, and said, hey, we should make these into movies, because nobody's reading those books. You know, it's there's nobody's going back 20 or 30 years, or in the case of Way Station to 1963 to make a great science fiction movie. I was desperate to make that movie. I really wanted to make Way Station. It was what I was hoping I would jump on after Tango Shalom, get the rights, get a screenplay together, and go make that movie, because you could make a great science fiction movie that wasn't going to break the bank. That if you could do a lot of great things with it, and I guess I wasn't the only one. So anyway, let me go on. The Select by F. Paul Wilson. Part medical and part conspiracy thriller. It focuses on two med students who apply for the Ingram College of Medicine, which is run by Cleaterman Pharmaceuticals. If accepted, it's tuition free. Little do they know that the acceptance comes in the form of subliminal hypnotic suggestion, and one of the two helps the other get in by changing one of her answers on an entrance test. That one corrected answer barely gets her in. The students are then spied on like Big Brother and are given further hypnotic suggestions to shape them into being loyal to the unethical practices of Cleaterman Pharmaceuticals. Quinn's boyfriend, Tim, who helped her on the test, is caught snooping around. He is drugged, unable to move, and bandaged up. His disappearance is a mystery to his classmates, but he is in plain sight. Without someone to watch her back, Quinn, who is not affected by the hypnosis, is on her own in discovering the truth. There are several chapters in the novel related to Tim's predicament and calculated escape. The novel does a great job ramping up the tension, but I don't think this would entirely work on a 2-hour time frame. I think that if it were adapted, more emphasis would be on the paranoia side of things, with subtle hints. I know some may consider it sacrilege to change things and or elements of a novel they love, but that's what the adaptation is. So yeah, a great part of this wonderful read would have to be streamlined. And of course, F. Paul Wilson wrote the book The Keep, that Michael Mann's second theatrical feature, which I don't think it's out on Blu-ray. I do have the letterboxed Laserdisc of it. I've seen that it is online. The Keep isn't as bad. You know, it's funny. I went and saw Michael Mann speak, and I actually asked him about The Keep, if he would ever revisit it, because he's done he's done director's cuts of some of his films, and he said no. And that was distressing, because I think that movie is a lot better than he gives it credit for, but boy, does he not like it, which is too bad. Next book, The Difference Engine by William Gibson and Bruce Sterling. It's an alternative history sci-fi novel, and like Gibson helping popularizing cyberpunk, this novel helped push the subgenre of steampunk. A steampunk discussion is probably warranted in a letter or discussion all of its own, because sadly I feel that general audiences really hadn't caught up to the subgenre, although it doesn't help if the majority of films which attempted this subgenre were bad films to begin with. Exceptions would be Polar Express, Hugo, or Jules Verne's classic 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I would like to have a story which went all out steampunk, so that tone and visual style is immediately set. It's going to have to be more than a fancy gun or wristwatch. It would also have to be a limited run series in order to really cover the world building. Well, I think that's kind of what's interesting is I've always thought that his Dark Materials series, the Philip Pullman series, was kind of steampunk. And the show is beautifully realized on HBO. Gone South by Robert McCammon, one of my favorite writers, who has sort of fallen into obscurity, even though he's still writing. Gone South. Yes, I love Stinger, Swan Song, and The Wolf's Hour, but this book is a road trip story with an eclectic group of characters. Dan Lambert, a former soldier with cancer as a result of Agent Orange, kills a bank officer who repossessed his truck, pretty much the only possession he had left. On the run from two oddball bounty hunters, one was a carny sideshow Siamese twin, the other an Elvis impersonator. He finds redemption as he aids Arden, a disfigured woman who seeks a supernatural faith healer in the depths of the Louisiana Bayou. I love Gone South. I love most of McCammon's books. One of my absolute dream projects of all time, bar none, I've said this before, I'll say it again, is I would love to see Robert McCammon's 1981 novel, They Thirst, turned into an awesome 4-hour movie or a miniseries. Basically, They Thirst is about the vampire king who comes to Los Angeles, and he basically takes over and turns the entire city into vampires. And he's opposed by a group of very Stephen King-esque type characters, led by police detective Andrew Paladizin. And I always wanted Mel Gibson to play him. I guess Mel Gibson's too old now, but why not? Why not have him come back and do it? And man, would I like to make that book. The first line of that book is tonight. I think it's tonight there were, or tonight there are. There were demons in the hearth, and this little kid is watching this fire burning in a cabin, like in Hungary or something. It's the dead of winter, and he's seeing faces in the flames, and they're waiting. Him and his mother are waiting for their father to return from some foul errand that he's on, and it's insinuated that the father was part of the village, a group of villagers that went to dispatch a vampire. And then, of course, the father comes back and he is a vampire, and the son and the mother take the guy on, and they end up killing him and burning their cabin gets burned down in the snowy, wintry land. And they're like running away, the mother and the mother and the son in the snow drifts, and you hear the father dying as he's burning to death. It's awesome. If you want to read a cool book, read Robert McCammon's They Thirst if you love vampires. I know vampires are passe, but the book kicks ass, and I can't believe it hasn't been made into a movie or TV show. Finally, there's Stephen King's Cycle of the Werewolf, which was adapted to 1985's Silver Bullet. With the recent King properties getting updates, I could see this as a contender for a remake. I'd probably pitch it as an 11 or 12 episode limited series for cable or streaming, but I wouldn't have it as a full hour if the narrative didn't call for it, and I would hope this series. I debated whether or not I should have it as an honorable mention because it's been done before, but I debated, and yeah, Cycle would probably be a bit more easy to do than what did become of the honorable mention, that being Fred Saberhagen's Empire of the East epic. Thanks, Darren J. Seeley. Well, Darren, I love reading lists of people's favorite books and what should get made into movies. I mean, I think one of the things that really I'm happy about in the time that we live now is so many things are getting adapted. I mean, craziness. If the Foundation trilogy gets made, to see Denis Villeneuve doing Dune, there's so much potential now, because what's interesting is that people like myself who are working in the industry have grown up. They remember these books, they're going after them, and they're making them, and I think some of my favorite movies, again, The Martian, Andy Weir's book, he self-published it chapter by chapter. It got picked up, it came out, it was a big success. And then Ridley Scott made a wonderful movie from it. And because I'm a big reader and a big proponent of these things, the fact that we have a Watchmen sequel, the fact that his Dark Materials is on, and look, they made the Golden Compass and it wasn't so good, but somebody said, hey, let's try it again. And now we're getting on HBO, we're getting his Dark Materials series. It's amazing. And all these King adaptations are coming down. I want to see a lot more classic sci-fi. I think classic sci-fi is a little more difficult, but there's a lot of horror novels out there. I mean, Glenn Duncan's The Last Werewolf, I've talked about that on the show before. If you want to read a great genre novel that has, oh my God, all the potential to be a great, there's actually 3 books now in the series. When I read the first book, there was only the first book, but I think Ridley Scott's company owns The Last Werewolf. That would be a dream project that I would love to make. But there's so many books. There's so many great books that I would love to adapt. And it's nice to see that we're getting a lot of those. And thank you for your letter. Thanks for telling me these things. I like hearing that. But yeah, let's see. That's interesting. I'm starting to get like solicitation letters. Would you like to work on this? Here comes Ian Samuels again. Once again, Ian Samuels has written a letter. Rob, 3 episodes in, and the interest fact is revealed by the makers of The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian's first season is a trilogy of trilogies itself, just like Disney is trying to do with the movies. Chapter 1, Chapter 2, The Child, and Chapter 3, The Sin, are pretty much the first story. Perhaps it could have been shown as one feature-length pilot episode. They have also revealed chapters 4 through 6 are going to make up the second story, and the final story of season 1 will be played out across chapters 7 to 9. Are there 9? I think there's only 8 episodes of The Mandalorian. No matter how great Chapter 3 is, and indeed it is a great Star Wars spectacular, the kind of stuff everyone was hoping for from Disney, but that is why the first 3 felt like they belonged together rather than 3 separate episodes or chapters. It is a similar thing that happened to Red Dwarf when they made their 8th season. the last season with the BBC. The BBC originally agreed to them having an hour-long pilot for season 8, but then after they had started production, the BBC changed their minds and insisted on no hour-long specials as they couldn't fit it into the schedule. So they had to move shots from other episodes and reshoot new ones to make what then became Back in the Red parts 1, 2, and 3. They did not flow well with a week in between each episode. Luckily, on the DVD release, the hour-long special of Back in the Red is available and feels much better than the 3-episode version enforced by the BBC. The Mandalorian is excellent and is the Star Wars we've been hoping for from Disney, but did they only make enough for 3 feature-length episodes and decide to break them up for a truly episodic series, making up season 1? I don't know, Ian. First of all, thanks for writing in again. I don't know. Maybe. I really do think that The Mandalorian was greenlit to be a test bed to see what they could do in order to bring down the costs of making a weekly Star Wars series. And I think that they've succeeded admirably with that, with their new technologies. And I can't wait to see what they're going to do in the future. So that's very exciting. Very exciting stuff. So thank you once again for writing a letter. Piggy66 says, use Streamlabs, bro. Super chat is broken 90% of the time. Well, you know what? Streamlabs is not, you can't download their software from Mac. I'm a Mac guy through and through. But yes, look, since there's been a lot of people that have said to me, and I appreciate that, they're looking out for the channel, that I should figure out how to connect the Streamlabs tip function to the channel. So if people want to donate or support the channel, they can. It's working out great for John. I would like to do that as well, because it also is for 24/7. So there's a lot of people. I have to say, you people are pretty nice to me, because there's a lot of people that write me and they say that I want to support the channel, but my country doesn't support super chats or anything. And there have been people that have just PayPal'd me money. And I have to say, while I really do appreciate that, I feel like you should be getting something for your cash. And I guess if you watch the show, you do. But I like the super chat feature, because at least I feel like, you know, you're supporting the actual show as it's going on. But yeah, a lot of people have said to me, it's pretty nice to hear, like, I've listened to your so many shows, but I've never been able to show you some love with the super chat, and it's very much appreciated. So I really need to look into that. Maybe I'll do that today, because a lot of people have asked me about that. And you know, it's interesting, because Google, I have that brings me to an interesting question. So taxes, you know, I have to pay taxes on super chats or any money that I make, right? So when you are on YouTube, Google takes 50% of your ad revenue off the top, and they just take 50%, and they take 30% of your super chat revenue. So I have a question that I have to ask my accountant. Can I say that 30% of super chat revenue is a business expense? I mean, it's money that I would ever get. It's taken off the top, but it's still money that I earned. So how does that work? I don't know. Because, man, wouldn't it be cool if you could write that off? Something tells me you probably can't, but it would be definitely an interesting question to look at. I don't know. The internet age. It's you learn something new every day. This letter comes from our man Franz Morhart. Here it goes. This is a good one. Last year's Bohemian Rhapsody, the music biopic following Freddie Mercury's rise to stardom and the famed band's personal struggles, was one of 2018's biggest hits on the big screen, earning over $900 million worldwide, and Rami Malek an Oscar for his portrayal of the Queen rocker Freddie Mercury. So it should come as no great surprise that producer Graham King is attempting to repeat, if not eclipse, his massive success by striking a deal with the Michael Jackson estate for the King of Pop's life and music rights. Yes, that was just announced, with plans to make a feature film. But can this movie moonwalk into my heart as gracefully as Michael Jackson did during the live broadcast of Motown 25, staring at the screen in awestruck, eye-popping incredulity? If accounts are to be believed when they claim this won't be a sanitized rendering of the most successful solo artist of all time, according to the Guinness Book of World Records, I guess because all the people who remember Elvis have dementia or died at the same time as rock and roll, but another poorly put together hit piece focusing on unsubstantiated claims of child sexual abuse and ignorant innuendo, then I have absolutely no interest in seeing it whatsoever and would rather burn in hell for all eternity than subject my poor eyeballs to a single frame of the metaphoric mountainous monument of mankind's excrement mislabeled a movie. Within the first few lines of their moronic musings on the topic, progressive propaganda publication The Mary Sue was already wondering aloud how Michael's troubled history with his own race would be dealt with, an allusion to the persistent false belief that, despite his innumerable proclamations of unabashed black pride, he was so publicly ashamed of his race that he whitened his skin. Never mind that pesky autopsy confirming he had inherited the humiliating disease known as vitiligo. Vitiligo. Let's keep humiliate him for using whitening cream even in death. Vitiligo is a progressive condition. The blotches get bigger and they migrate too. Minutes in a makeup chair becomes hours. It affects your quality of life. That's why dermatologists prescribe creams to even skin tone. Continually shaming Michael Jackson for trusting his doctor the way the previous generation did is contemptible pablum. Michael Jackson was also not a pedophile. He was falsely accused, set up by a media with an obvious bias against him, and presumed guilty by an ignorant and misinformed public. At a 2005 trial, for instance, all of the hours and money the media pumped into covering the trial was a gamble that would pay off only if Michael Jackson went to jail. There were over 2,000 reporters in Santa Barbara, and plans were already in place for insider reports from the jail where he would be housed. When he was acquitted, the media was dumbfounded and quickly left Santa Barbara. They often left the courtroom before the cross-examination, so eager were they to report damning falsehoods that they never bothered to report the truth. The family of the accuser in the trial, the Arvizos, had a track record of accusing people of sexual and physical abuse. The mother, Janet, had made similar charges against her estranged ex-husband. She had also accused guards at a JCPenney store of accosting her in a parking lot, where she said that one guard removed her bra and pinched her nipple 25 times. She testified that her son, Gavin, Jackson's accuser, had to put her breast back into a bra after the assault. Janet Arvizo claimed that Michael Jackson was holding her prisoner at Neverland in order to prevent her from talking to the media. In fact, receipts and security logs proved that she often left the ranch for full-body waxes, manicures, shopping, and dental visits, all on Michael's dime. She also testified that she escaped from Neverland 3 times, only returned again a few days later. Several celebrities had been victims of the Arvizo family before Michael Jackson ever encountered them. They included Chris Tucker and George Lopez. Both testified that the family had pressured them for money and claimed they couldn't afford Gavin's cancer treatments. It was later discovered he had been covered by his father's insurance the entire time. The only reason that Michael had paid out a settlement in the past was because his business associates had advised him to pay to make it go away. They had money invested in Jackson and wanted him to focus on making a return on that investment instead of spending time and money defending himself in court. After months of pressure, he relented finally when his civil case was unconstitutionally set before his criminal trial, and he was unable to persuade a judge to switch the dates. These payments did nothing to stop an independent FBI investigation and was never intended to. That's not how California law works. The investigation of 1993, which saw hundreds of children interviewed looking for a shred of evidence of criminal sexual misconduct, to close, citing no evidence. This decision to pay the civil trial off in 93 in anticipation of a possible criminal trial, despite being the correct call, laid the ground for all future allegations, and Michael called it the worst decision I ever made. The general public is almost wholly ignorant of the actual facts of the case. They just watch a few documentaries filled with slanderous lies without doing real research, and that is enough to call him guilty. Court of law be damned. Michael Jackson left the courtroom a broken man, one who never reclaimed the youthful innocence that catapulted him to the top of the charts and made him a household name, whose career probably suffered irreparable harm. He may have avoided years behind bars, but his world became another kind of prison, one where he is entrapped by a hungry media and the innuendo of a misinformed public. Michael Jackson made a huge impact on the world with his charitable efforts. He received many humanitarian awards and even a world record for his donations of over $300 million in life and $200 million in his name since his passing. Michael Jackson was a supremely kind and gentle man who always did the right thing and put others before himself, even when doing the right thing had disastrous repercussions. Michael Jackson was a man who would ignore Chris Tucker's advice to be careful around that family if it meant doing nothing, as a little boy died of cancer. That is the simple truth. But nobody who knows the truth, the fans of Michael Jackson, the one studio executives are expecting to rush out and see this movie, is going to pay hard-earned money to see it. Yet another post-mortem lynching of Michael Jackson, an amazingly talented man of astonishing, resilient, and awesome moral character, deserving of praise, emulation, respect, and admiration. An American hero. Why not just tell people I'm an alien from Mars? Tell them I eat live chickens and that I do a voodoo dance at midnight. They'll believe anything you say because you're a reporter. But if I, Michael Jackson, were to say I'm an alien from Mars and eat live chickens and do a voodoo dance every night at midnight, people would say, oh man, that Michael Jackson is nuts. He's cracked up. You can't believe a damn word that comes out of his mouth. Michael Jackson. Well, Franz, I did not know you felt that strongly about Michael Jackson. I met Michael Jackson once. I did. I met Michael Jackson at the Golden Apple comic book store on Melrose in Los Angeles. Now, it's moved. It's on the corner of basically La Brea and Melrose, but it used to have the flagship Golden Apple store, which I went to for many, many years, buying my comic books every Wednesday. Michael Jackson would go there. He would show up in a limo. They would close the store, and he would come in and shop. And one day I was in Golden Apple. I was the only one there. And, I knew everybody. I was good friends with everybody that worked there, including Sharon, who was Bill Leibowitz's wife. And Michael Jackson came by, and they let me stay in the store. And I actually exchanged a few words with him. And he was there with kids and their parents. And he bought a lot of stuff. And it was funny because I guess he figured that because I was in the store that I was okay. And he actually asked my opinion of a few statues, and we had conversations about what things I thought were really cool. And he was delightful, and he knew his stuff. I mean, he was a sweaty, I thought he would just come in and just point at things and buy them. And there was a little bit of that, but I did have interaction with him. I did talk to him about stuff, and I for about 10 minutes, and then I had to go, and they stayed in the store. But he was a perfectly affable fellow to me. Of course, how can you base anything? I don't know. I think I don't know. I've always enjoyed Michael Jackson's music. It was interesting for me when Bad came out. I was working in Silver Platters in Seattle, and Silver Platters was at the time the largest optical disc only retailer in the world, meaning all we sold were CDs and laser discs. So Tower Records was bigger, but they sold a bunch of other stuff, but all we sold were optical discs. And it was the first time, it's so funny to think back to this. It was the first time that CDs had pictures on them. They were just printed labels for a while, but then they came out with these picture discs that they charged a premium for. And Michael Jackson's Bad was one of the first picture discs, and along with like George Michael's Faith. And it was a big deal. And I remember, I had to buy Bad the day it came out because it was the first CD, one of the first CD picture discs. But yeah, I mean, obviously you're a passionate Michael Jackson fan, and I appreciate that. I was more of a Prince fan. I mean, I liked Michael Jackson, and his music has always been catchy, and I've always liked his music. But I was much more of a Prince guy because, Prince sang a lot about like sex, and I more related to that than the King of Pop's music. But how can you not like Michael Jackson's music? So I appreciate that. I honestly don't know, with everything that's going on, especially with those documentaries, then Leaving Neverland dropping on HBO. I don't know what the truth is. I don't know. I do think it's going to be a dicey situation. And who do you get to play Michael Jackson? Honestly, that would be the thing that would scare me the most about that movie, is how do you cast somebody to play Michael Jackson that can also act? And as far as the Mary Sue is concerned, that reaction is par for the course for them. Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. Like you pointed out, the autopsy did prove that, yes, he did suffer from that ailment. And of course, Michael Jackson was he represented Black music. I mean, in his music, working with Quincy Jones, it's not like he was trying to make Hall & Oates music. Not that Hall & Oates is bad, But you know, uh, it's so weird to say that he shunned his own people or his own musical legacy. I mean, it's so strange because he made some of the great black music of all time. So I don't think Michael Jackson was ever somebody who really was turning away from his own race or his own roots. That never. But if the Mary Sue said it, that doesn't surprise me. But I want to thank you for writing in. Normally, I wouldn't talk about Michael Jackson on this channel, but clearly, when somebody as passionate as yourself writes in, how could I not read your letter? And speaking of letters, Stubble McShave has written a letter. And hi, Rob, I wanted to write to you about fandom. And then I don't mean your average fandom, but something quite different. And I know that you're going to laugh and roll your eyes when I'm writing this. I'm talking about my fandom for the Wheel of Time series. As everyone knows, Stubble McShave, longtime imagination connoisseur all the way from Sweden. I don't think, the way I love Star Trek, Stubble likes the Wheel of Time series. And now we're going to find out exactly why. I've always wondered, this is one of the questions that I've asked myself often. What is it about the Wheel of Time series that Stubble McShave loves? And now I'm going to find out. A quick background. I started reading the books in 1994 when I was 17 years old. And after a year or two, I started to look on the internet, which was at its infancy then, after other people who had read the books. I found a few discussion forums. I was mostly involved with a site called Theoryland. Theoryland was in part focused on trying to figure out what was going to happen next and how everything worked in the world where the series takes place. The things discussed and theorized about were very deep cut and nerdy stuff. I love that. One of us would come up with a theory on how something worked in the world or how a character would evolve, and the rest of us would try and argue against or for it, if we thought the idea had merit. Whenever Jordan, the author, was doing a book tour and took questions, we would zero in on specific facts that would confirm or shoot down one of our theories. We would confer on what questions to ask to get the best response. We couldn't just ask him right out. If we did, we'd get a RAFO in return. RAFO stands for read and find out, and meant that we just have to find out when it was revealed in a future book. The questions we'd ask him would have to be obscure enough to not set off his warning senses and read and find out the questions, but instead provide a piece of the puzzle to our theories. In hindsight, we had some bonkers theories on what would happen, but we actually got a lot of things right on what would happen a few books before they were actually revealed. This fan community was a real tight community. We got to know each other pretty well, and some of us got married to each other. There were examples of people moving from the UK to Australia in order to marry a fellow fan and start a family. Wow. We were a bunch of people who interacted with each other more or less daily for almost 2 decades. When Jordan died and Brandon Sanderson was tasked to finish the series, we knew that he was a fan of the series, but we didn't know how much of a fan he was. It turned out that he had visited many of the fan sites for several years, and he knew about many of us. When we were trying to get stuff from him, it was both easier and more difficult. It was easier because he didn't hold on to information as tight as Jordan had done. It was more difficult because he knew what we were doing and would sometimes call us out by saying, "Oh, you want to know if this person was present at that meeting because Tara, as a member of Theoryland, wants to confirm her theory." He often gave a wink and a nod and would sometimes answer or sometimes give his own read and find out on the question. It was a great fan community, but since the last book was released on the 8th of January of 2013, the fan communities have receded. The sites were still there, but very few new theories were presented since the series was done. There were some hanging threads after the series were finished, and we had some discussions around those, but for the most part, the intense fandom I'd had with a bunch of strangers that almost became family was over and done. That was until the series on Amazon Prime was announced. The old site got a little more active again, and friendships were reformed. Nowadays, there are not that many new theories that we're discussing. We're mostly just reconnecting with our fandom and each other. The person who ran the fan site, Theoryland, now has a YouTube channel called The Dusty Wheel, where he invites some of his old guard for talking about both the book series and the adaptation. It's called The Dusty Wheel because Theoryland was referenced as such in Book 13, The Dusty Wheel, the best place in Camelin to listen to rumors. Most of them were untrue, but that was half the fun. You might think that many of us old fans would want to have a word-for-word adaptation, but in most cases, that's not true. We want it to be the best it can be for a different type of medium, and we're quite accepting with some significant changes. Maybe it's just because we're older and possibly wiser. The group of people that were active on Theoryland in its heyday are generally between 30 and 70 years old now. In general, we're very inclusive when it comes to welcoming new fans, although we're not as inclusive in a personal way as we once were. When it comes to TV series, you won't find anything but excitement from us, with some exceptions which confirm the rule. The creators of the series have been very generous with information, although they're still holding back on many things. Sanderson and Harriet, Jordan's widow, are involved with the project, and its showrunner is a longtime fan of the series, which bodes well for the adaptation. I wanted to tell you about this type of fandom because there's not many others like it out there. There are very few other properties where you have fandom that speculates on a given storyline for 20 years or more and form tight friendships and families as a result of that fandom. The only thing that comes close are some Star Trek fans that met at conventions and formed families or tight friendships, but even they didn't have ongoing theories about one storyline for decades. That was all I wanted to say about that. So, Rob, were you ever part of a similar fandom? And what are your thoughts on it? Thanks, Stubble. Well, what a cool letter. You know, you bring up something that, the internet changed fandom forever. And I've often said on the show that Rick Berman said to me when I was interviewing him for the Star Trek documentaries that he believed that the rise of the internet was facilitated by two things: pornography and Star Trek. And I tend to agree with it. Once we had the internet, the first thing you're starting to look at is porn. And then, of course, Star Trek, talking about Star Trek online. My roommate in college, when I first moved to California, John Parkan, it was the first time we had a BBS board, a bulletin board service. He had computers. He was really into computers. And he set up a Star Trek BBS board in our apartment. And I could go on and 20 people could call in at one time, or there could be 20 people on the BBS board. I don't even know how it worked back then, but I used to spend hours talking with people about Star Trek, ship designs, how did warp drive work. I mean, the most minute stuff, the minutia that we would get into. And it was nice because, as I've often told people, when I was growing up as a fan, I didn't have anybody to talk to about these things. I would often wonder things about starship design, but who are you going to talk to about this? And I didn't have anyone. I didn't even know anybody that liked Star Trek as much as I did. I had literally no friends that were fanatical about Star Trek. I had friends that liked movies and things, but it wasn't until I got into junior high and high school that I had friends that were as passionate about film as I was. But when I was younger, there was nobody to talk to at all. And, reading the Franz Joseph technical manual or the Enterprise blueprints, or like I told people when I would run out and go get paperback horror novels. I mean, there was no kids that liked horror novels as much as me. I mean, or Star Trek books there was nothing, zero. And one of the things I did love about the internet, and for me, the BBS board, I did not own I didn't own a computer myself until I moved to California. And the first computer I owned was I bought a Macintosh, and USC had a program where you could get a Macintosh at a substantial discount and pay it off. And that was the first computer that I owned, was my Macintosh. And I got it in 88. So I didn't own a computer until then. And the first computer, I mean, my friend Peter Chambers, who lived across the street from me, had an Apple II. And that was the first time I ever worked on a computer. And we would load up games, text-based games on cassette tapes. It would take an hour to load. So in 88, when I got my first computer, I also was playing on these BBS boards where people were calling in and having these conversations. And it was really interesting. And the only other time, I mean, I didn't, on AOL, I was really active on AOL in the 90s. And I spent a lot of time on Star Trek chat boards. Ron Moore would go on to the Star Trek chat boards, and it was great to have a writer producer for Star Trek to talk to or interact with, and he would always be there. And there was actually a chat room on AOL called the Hollywood Cafe that was full of people now like Chris McQuarrie, and it was full of a lot of people that later went on and became pretty famous. And we were all in the Hollywood Cafe, and that was like a den of vipers. If you weren't a good writer, if you weren't, as I like to say, a cunning linguist, you would get eviscerated in there. But it was really interesting. That was the first time I met this girl named Amy Cohen that I dated for a while, who's George Clooney's assistant. And I met a lot of people in the Hollywood Cafe board that I've later come across in real life. And it was sort of an interesting place. It's very different now because, I mean, those AOL chat boards, but I would go to places. I didn't have a community like you did. I mean, Hollywood Cafe was the closest. There was a lot of people there that I would know or interact with. But I didn't have a community like you had. But what an interesting thing. I mean, it's great to see. Hopefully the Wheel of Time series will be everything you want it to be, and that there was the people are involved, and hopefully it'll end up being great for you. And I don't think anybody is more excited for the Wheel of Time series than I am, only because I want to hear your reaction to it. I'm hoping that your reaction that you will share with the imagination connoisseurs here will be joyful, and we will have your enthusiasm. You write us long letters every week talking about if the episode was good or not, because I think that would be pretty fun. Here's another letter from Joe Foley. Wait, before I read that, I'll see. I haven't jumped back into the chat. But yeah, I think that's the best thing that ever happened to fandom is is the internet. Jeremiah wrote again. She says, is it she, he? I don't know. I think he, maybe. I don't know. Is Jer a masculine name or I don't know. I'll just assume you're a dude because most people are who watch my channel. Do you prefer to read books, ebooks, or audiobooks? I still prefer actual books. I own over 1,500 fantasy and sci-fi books, and I only recently warmed to audiobooks. No, I'm a book lover. I don't like ebooks because I mean, look, I love the actual act of carrying a book around. There's something about it. I've always loved the design of books, the smell of the paper, and I love books. Now, I also grew up loving audio dramas. So audiobooks are okay. I don't own any audiobooks. But I've listened to them on long journeys, but I really prefer to read books. And I'll tell you, there was one time my brother Jim gave me a book by James Lee Burke, and it was part of his Dave Robichaux series, and the book was called In the Electric Mist with Confederate Dead, and it was actually made into a movie with Tommy Lee Jones playing Detective Dave Robichaux. I was driving from Seattle back to California, and I actually went to see this girl in San Francisco, and as I was driving between San Francisco and LA, I was reading this book, and this is how into it. I was so into this book, I couldn't stop. I was stopping the whole time, and it ended up taking me 2 days to drive from San Francisco to LA. I got in like a Motel 6 or something because I kept stopping, because I wanted to know what happened next. But yes, and that was James Lee book. James in the movie's called In the Electric Mist, but the book is actually called In the Electric Mist with Confederate Dead. And if you haven't read the James Lee Burke's Dave Robichaux novels, they're not all great. I mean, I read a lot of these series of books, and that was one I really got into. But yeah, I was into it, man. I was into it. I love books. Alexander Wilson says, nobody did more for Black music than Michael Jackson. He brought Little Richard and Curtis Mayfield's music catalogs and gave it to them or their family for free. The movie is going to be BS. I did not know that. See, that's what I thought. I mean, I always saw Michael Jackson as sort of the culmination of American Black music. I mean, in terms of a Black artist, he was the zenith, man, and his vocals and his dancing and the fact that he had people like Quincy Jones producing for him. To me, there's a reason that he was called the King of Pop, and I think that it was really interesting to actually to have at least an interaction with him, because when when I meet people, fans, when you meet fans, to me, there's been all this talk about what's a real fan. Well, you can see in you can see the delight. Like when I've walked around um like Comic Cons or conventions with people, there are two kinds of people. There are people that like that usually when they're at a convention, they like being there. So there's people that like the experience of going to conventions, and then there's the people that are like really into it and know exactly what they're talking about. And that when you're with somebody that collects action figures, like Elizabeth has a friend who works for Disney named Eugene, and I was able to walk around this convention with him, and we were like, leisurely paced, going from one action figure place to another, and he knows his stuff. And so he does a Doctor Who podcast, and when we were walking around, he and I are looking at we're looking at the same kinds of things, and he knows about die-cast Valkyries, transformable Valkyries from Macross Robotech, or Gundam. He's really into Gundam. So, he and I are like, we have these like grown men having these conversations about the minutia of this stuff. And Michael Jackson reminded me of one of us. Like when he was at the one time I saw him and talked to him, and he was really into it. Like he knew this stuff, and if he was looking at a statue, like he would know if it was like a Bowen design statue or something. Like he knew. He was really into this stuff. So I got that feeling from him. And I remember thinking, I went away, I was like, oh my God, I just met Michael Jackson. But more than that, I was like, and he's one of me. He's one of us. As John Schnepp, the late great John Schnepp, would have said, Michael Jackson was definitely a sweaty. And he was. And that was the thing that I took away. I was not gonna lie, I was beaming. I'm like, I just met Michael Jackson in my favorite comic book store. I mean, what better time can you have to say something like that happened? I mean, that's one of the great things about living in LA is like, oh yeah, man, I met Michael Jackson at my comic book store. So yeah, I can't even imagine. I mean, it would be really interesting though. I don't know if it's even possible to do a Michael Jackson biopic and do justice to him, and who knows? But if they focus, I mean, I thought one of the things, whether you love Bohemian Rhapsody or not, I mean, a lot of people said, oh, it didn't come down hard enough on Freddie Mercury's homosexuality or him having AIDS, and that might be true, but what I really liked about Bohemian Rhapsody was it was such a celebration of the music of Queen, and yeah, okay, I understand. It's you can focus on a number of different things, but I think Bohemian Rhapsody did so well because you couldn't watch that movie and leave it without a smile being on your face. And who doesn't love Queen? And if you've grown up in the 70s and 80s, you can't not have a favorite Queen song. And I think that movie delivered. And maybe, I mean, I didn't think Rocket Man was as good, but it was another movie that celebrated that music. And if they could make a Michael Jackson biopic that did that, celebrated his music, celebrated the things like Alexander, like you just said, I think it would be great. Yeah. Oh, Alexander's here again. He says, in a change of subject, the most disappointing movie I saw in the theater was The Matrix Reloaded and subsequently The Matrix Revolutions. They aged like vinegar instead of wine. I couldn't wait to leave the theater. I can understand that. I think that the Matrix sequels have aged. I do think they've aged better. But the first Matrix, when I first saw that movie, Keanu Reeves had been in a movie called Johnny Mnemonic that was directed by, it's so funny for me to say this, but Johnny Mnemonic was directed by a fine artist, an artist that who did multimedia work, but also he was known for painting these big images of people falling. And he did a New Order video. I want to say it was Bizarre Love Triangle. But his name was Robert Longo. And Robert Longo's, I think, first and only movie was Johnny Mnemonic with Keanu Reeves. And I remember I went and saw there was a girl that I was dating that I met at Warner Brothers named Astrid Gattuso, and she and I went and saw the Robert Longo exhibit at LACMA. I think I still even have the pamphlet. It was like 31 years ago, but I was really into Robert Longo, and I was really disappointed with Johnny Mnemonic. I thought it was just not a good movie, and so when The Matrix was coming out, I had tickets to go see it on the Warner lot. It was at the new Steve Ross Theater. It was then pretty new, and I would go see anything that was in the Steve Ross Theater. And I'm like, I'm gonna go see The Matrix, whatever. And I just couldn't. I mean, I like the Wachowskis Bound, but I'm like, another Keanu Reeves cyber thriller. Is it going to be any good? And because I was so disappointed by Johnny Mnemonic, but I figured I'll go. Seeing The Matrix for the first time, nobody knew anything about it. It was an advanced screening. I don't think anybody had seen it. I hadn't read anything about it. I knew it was coming out. It was called The Matrix. I probably had seen the trailer, which was intriguing. But I knew nothing about it. I was floored by The Matrix. Because, I already loved anime and manga and all that. But the moment the red pill, blue pills thing, and now it's become such a cliche, the you've been red pilled and all that. But at the time, man, when he wakes up and you find out that he's what the Matrix is and that he's a living battery, I don't think I've ever been more flabbergasted by a movie, a science fiction movie, because I like to think of myself as a savvy viewer. So frequently, I'm always ahead of movies that I'm watching. That blew me away. I just couldn't believe what I was watching. I thought that was the coolest shit, man. I think The Matrix is it's certainly one of the great science fiction films ever made. And if you've never heard, I mean, it holds up really well. And by the way, talk about a 4K disc that really the first Matrix looks way better on 4K disc than it has ever looked on home video. Like Die Hard, it's an essential purchase if you have a 4K player. But anyway, I have to say that, boy, was I primed to see The Matrix Reloaded. And when I saw it, I mean, I understand you make The Matrix and suddenly it becomes not just a hit movie, but this cause celeb. It ushered in a new era in pop culture, really. I mean, the ideas, all of it. I mean, it was ground zero of the world we live in now. I mean, it was the culmination of where the internet had come to at that point. It certainly opened the door for where it was going to go to in the future. It's 20 years old. We're 20 years on from The Matrix, and that film, it still resonates. I see things that remind me of The Matrix almost on a daily basis, not just online either. But I have to say, dude, I am with you, Alexander. When I saw The Matrix Reloaded, now there's really cool stuff in The Matrix Reloaded. Like, I did like the car chase, but even the car chase, like, even when you're watching all this stuff, it's almost like we have to outdo ourselves. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to build a freeway, and then put this, and they shot that chase sequence. But there was a lot of goofy stuff in The Matrix Reloaded. I mean, one of the things about The Matrix that I really liked was it had a lot of verisimilitude in it. Like, you didn't see it coming. And there's a lot of goofiness and a lot of the battles, and they added a lot of stuff that who doesn't like Monica Bellucci, and she certainly looked great. And I love the character of the Merovingian and all that, but all of it just seemed like a lot of hooey to me, and I also didn't think that I didn't like the direction they took the story. The whole idea of The Matrix was kind of lost, and it turned into something else. And I think the Wachowskis were victims of their own success. I think they didn't have necessarily a great follow-up idea, so they put every idea that they could come up with. And I think those movies are unfortunately very, I would say, muddled. But that said, now when I watch them and without the anticipation of, I guess I feel the same way about the Star Wars sequels. With time, I can sit back and I'm not just so, why is this sequel so not good? With time, I've been able to enjoy at least The Matrix Reloaded more. The Matrix Revolutions, not so much, even though I like watching it because there's lots of cool stuff in it. I'm just like, why are you telling this story? The whole thing about The Matrix to me was this idea about what is real and what isn't real. And then the same is true. The Matrix ushered in the Matrix sequels ushered in this kind of weird, this idea about storytelling that's sort of it's not fun. It's like what they did with Westworld, like the first season of Westworld. You know, when you get to the end of Westworld and you realize that they've been playing with time frames and everything is not taking place at the same time, and you're basically being tricked. The audience is being tricked. And when you're watching something, you know, you're waiting to go along with this, and then these reveals happen that are not intuitive in terms of storytelling, but it's almost like they're pulling the rug out from under you and then showing you what's happening. And it's kind of cool, but I feel like the trick becomes more important than the story that's being told. And when the whole business, as much as I find the architect an interesting character and all that, you're just like, wait a minute, what? I mean, the simplicity that the machines took over, turned human beings into batteries, and that's it. And then when they got into this whole what's happened before is going to happen again, the Battlestar Galactica-ness of it all, or it got to the point where it's just what? And it got a little weird, man. It got weird. And I feel your pain, Alexander. I feel your pain. It wasn't there. Anyway, this other letter that I was going to read comes from Joe Foley. Hey, it's Joe coming at the Post-Geek Singularity again from my bicycle. Rob, close your eyes. For this letter, you will not need them. Do you feel it? It's created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us, binding the galaxy together. It is the Force. I've seen countless videos and articles along with the interwebs making the case that Rey is either a poorly written character or that she's the best character to happen to Star Wars. I'm in the boat that thinks she's a poorly written character. But unlike a lot of fellow fans, I do not think this is intentional nor entirely a feminist agenda. I sense Rey's hollow character actually stems from something much worse brewing behind the scenes. Disney does not understand the Force. To me, it feels like Disney is using the Force as a superpower similar to what we would see in the MCU, and now, as a result, we have a galaxy filled with overpowered Force users. Look at Broom Boy at the end of Episode 8. In his 30 seconds of screen time, I believe him to be a poorly written character within Star Wars lore. I can say the same about a new character in The Mandalorian, but I do not want to tread into spoiler territory. Let's look back to the prequels for a second. Anakin is literally written as a Gary Sue. He is born through the Force, destined to become the most powerful Force user. Even he couldn't pull off some of the things I'm seeing in these sequels. In the fan-beloved Episode 1, Anakin is clearly powerful in the Force, but without the proper training, his power does not exceed enhanced reflexes displayed in pod racing, and these reflexes are only special to humans. Other species had this ability without using the Force at all. Did we see young Anakin successfully pull out a Jedi mind trick on his first try or force gripping a broom with his mind without any hesitation or thought? No, because in my opinion, these kinds of skills should take focus and guidance to accomplish. How is the Force user special if it's easy to obtain and easy to master? I've read the argument that Rey can manipulate somebody's mind with no training or concentration because she knows the legend of the Jedi. Well, so did Anakin. He was so knowledgeable in the Jedi that he was able to call out Qui-Gon to his face and identify his weapon. Just because you know about something doesn't mean you can do it. I've also heard the argument that because Rey is older, again, I don't think this is how the Force works. I think it would require years of focus and discipline, years of KF letting go of oneself, becoming one with the Force, and not just age. Just because someone turns 30 doesn't mean they can become an Olympic gold medalist with no effort. As for Broom Boy being able to levitate a broom with his mind, people often bring up Luke on Hoth in Episode 5. But in my opinion, those scenes differ greatly. In that scene, Luke was trapped in a moment of desperation and needed all of his concentration to retrieve his lightsaber to make it out alive. Not to mention that Episode 5 took place a few years after his teachings from Obi-Wan, and it's easily believable that Luke's character would take the teachings seriously and want to expand his learning as much as he can before meeting Master Yoda. Luke gets two amazing mentors, and Rey gets someone who has given up on life, but that doesn't hold her back at all. Unlike Rey, Luke must overcome hardships and make mistakes for the greater good, like when he abandons his own training to save his friends and fails. Episode 8, on the other hand, happens days later and doesn't deliver on any real progression of the characters. Yes, they become more powerful, but we do not need to see how or why. Rey's training becomes a comedy act. Kylo's real training, teased at the end of The Force Awakens, is being told to smash his helmet, which is disappointing because I thought The Last Jedi was a great opportunity to show the different philosophies of the Sith and the differences between how Jedis and Sith are trained. Almost a parallel of Episode 5, but from a completely different point of view. That would have been actually really interesting. As for the ending of Episode 8, I agree with you. Having a Jedi intervene in a battle without actually fighting was great until it freaking killed him. The only way I can justify this is Luke has become so suicidal that he decided his time was up and asked the Force to take him away at that exact moment. And since the Force was so impressed with the way he handled Kylo, it granted him that wish. I do not understand why Kylo can send shirtless pics of himself via Force Skype chat, yet Luke cannot create an astral image of himself without it killing him. 1 minute, Kylo is stopping a blaster bolt midair, then loses a battle to an untrained Jedi the moment she remembers the Force exists. And do not even get me started on the new Force ghost powers. I'm sorry for my Star Wars negativity, but my love for the franchise has been embedded in me for so long as I can remember as the holy grail of franchises, and to see it handled with so little care makes my heart heavy. For these reasons, the idea of Disney making a trilogy focusing on the origins of the Force makes me worried, to say the least. I do not intend on sending many negative letters about Star Wars because I'm coming to grips with that maybe the franchise just isn't for me anymore, and I'm truly glad people can find enjoyment from these films. I have plenty of content to look forward to, but it does bum me out. I will always have the first 6 films to treasure as well as the old expanded universe. There's also so much Star Wars coming our way. Hopefully they accidentally make something truly awesome. Thanks to your parallels with the Star Trek franchise, you've helped me be less negative about the whole situation, but that doesn't mean I can learn to love it. I love your positivity. I love the positivity your channel brings to the table. I'm also sorry for clogging your mailbox, but your show makes me think. Thank you for all that you do. Joe F. P.S. With the new Disney version of spoiler character in The Mandalorian, the subtle reboot of Star Wars is complete. I feel they took the Boba Fett and Yoda origin movie scripts from 2015 and mashed them into one, while also rebranding them into their own characters. Yes, that's creative, but in the worst ways. P.P.S. Congratulations on reading this entire letter using Power of the Force. Well, Joe, I like that letter. I thought that was good. You know, again, I think the problem with all of these franchises is a problem. I think they all suffer from the same problem, and that is one of authorship. And I think what happens, it's like, okay, Star Wars has been around now for 42 years, and we all know what it's about. We've all been reading Star Wars stories, even the EU, and it was, 91 when Dark Empire and the Thrawn trilogy was released. So you've got over a quarter century of stories and the mythology being built up in visual dictionaries and the story group and the Clone Wars series. I think one of the real problems that I have with both Star Wars and Star Trek is there is no set. Like, somebody needs to come down and write, well, what can you actually do with the Force? Like, I hated the beginning of The Force Awakens when Kylo Ren was able to stop a blaster bolt in midair and just leave it hanging there. I'm like, I don't believe that. You know, I don't believe that as a Force power. I don't. I think that crossed a line. No verisimilitude. And I really think when you're dealing with these franchises, I can't stand this weird retconning that happens, especially when they take characters like Spock. Oh, let's give him a learning disability. I find that so offensive. Not that there aren't people with learning disabilities, but the whole character of Spock, the way that he's been treated since 2009, I think is a misunderstanding of his character. They're constantly trying to give him what we would consider to be modern ailments of some kind in order to undercut him as a character. And I'm like, why is there that need to do that? Spock is a guy that he had to be twice as good as the normal Vulcan, you know, and the fact that he went out into the world and learned to do all this, Spock is a badass. he is a badass, and he's a savant character, and he's a character that's been observing humans. And what they did with him in Discovery was, it was written by, that was really lazy, stupid writing when they dumb characters down like that. Just like when the Force can be anything and anybody, there's no real understanding. I mean, to me, I always saw the Force as certainly a metaphor for people. I think that everybody could learn to somehow tap into the Force, but not everybody could be an adept Force user. And the fact that maybe, whether it's midi-chlorians, although I hated that too, there were people, look, just like there are people that are born with athletic gifts or born with intellectual gifts, Force users, I would think you would have to be born, like you'd have to be a certain way in order to first be able to channel the Force. You have to be susceptible to the Force so you can channel it, because the Force is around everybody all the time, but not everybody is that way. And I don't necessarily think that if you're unaware of the Force, maybe there's some people that are channeling it like Broom Boy or whatever. But now it's this idea that the Force, I mean, to me, the character of Rey was just narrative expediency. They needed a character who could do all these things, and it made no sense. I mean, to me, that's just bad. It's bad storytelling, and that's what I like the idea that Luke was unaware he was a Force user. Maybe he didn't realize that being a pilot, he could bullseye womp rats, and his T-16 was what he was, an adept Force user, but didn't know it. So, you know, when you find somebody to channel your talent, and if you want to think about it metaphorically, it's anybody who has an innate talent. When you find a mentor figure that explains or recognizes that you have this innate talent, whether you're good, like I wish I could draw. You know, I always wanted to draw. And when I was a little kid, I tried to teach myself, like I would draw, I would trace things and try and draw comic book panels and stuff. And I couldn't do it. I took art classes, and there's some things I did that were good, but I couldn't, I wanted to be able to draw human faces and things. I just couldn't do it no matter what. And I realized my talent does not lie in fine art. As much as I mean, I like doing things like sculpting. You know, I took a ceramics course at USC that I was pretty good in, and I liked what I was doing, but I couldn't draw. And I don't know if any amount of mentorship could have turned me into somebody that would have been a good drawer. But I do think, you know, the idea of the Force represented, metaphorically to me, the innate talent anybody has. When you have a mentor that helps you develop that talent, you get to develop that talent. But I don't think anybody can become a Force user, and it makes no sense to me. I know they're going to retcon with this final movie, whether if Rey is indeed Palpatine's granddaughter, or she's a clone, or whatever the hell she is. I mean, they're going to retcon all of that. I think the story of her, they needed somebody who could wield the Force to make this work. And I think that was a mistake. You know, I don't necessarily think that even the main characters for this new Star Wars sequel trilogy had to be Force users. Why not just concentrate? Like they said, the legacy characters were, I know they want to make new movies with new characters for a new generation because the old characters were old. That was the one thing they needed to do. Disney said, look, we can't focus on Han, Leia, and Luke and Chewie and R2 and 3PO because they're old characters. They're 40 years old. Or at the time they were almost 40 years old. So they had to start anew. And in starting anew, they just made an amalgamation of Star Wars characters and threw them at the screen. That was what they did with Voyager and Star Trek. They took Star Trek tropes, turned them into characters, and we went from there. But it bothers me because the lack of creativity in those movies, I mean, seeing a rehash, if you watch Return of the Jedi and then watch The Force Awakens right afterwards, it's very perplexing because you get the Empire is taken, the Empire is killed, the seat of power, the Emperor is killed, the Death Star 2 is blown up, and then you see the celebrations all over the galaxy, and then the next movie there's a new empire. I mean, it's so weird to me that they could have focused on telling a different story, but they didn't. They sat and went, okay, we need something that's almost exactly the same as Star Wars to bring it back, but we'll have new people in it. I thought and I'm sure that was Disney's mandate. And that's corporate. You can never, corporate interests are diametrically opposed to great storytelling. Because once your corporate interests, once again, Don't put your universe in front of your story. Don't put your corporate interests before your characters in your story, because you're going to lose. I mean, and then of course, Force Awakens made a lot of money, but it was a dead end. Like, where are you going to take it in not having a story all mapped out? What are you going to do? Where are you going to go? And yeah, I mean, it was definitely a bummer. But look, I'm going into the Rise of Skywalker. I want it to be good. Look, J.J. Abrams has, in my mind, other than Mission Impossible 3, I haven't liked any of his movies. As a matter of fact, I have actively disliked them collectively as a whole. I don't think that there's another filmmaker whose movies I have actively disliked. If you talk about Star Trek 09, Into Darkness, The Force Awakens, and Super 8, I as far as an oeuvre of films is concerned, there are few filmmakers whose movies I've disliked more for various reasons. And I don't like that, but I'm going to go into this movie because maybe J.J. Abrams can win me over. I am hoping against hope that Rise of Skywalker is good. Certainly there's interesting imagery in it. I hope I'm not angry by it. I mean, for me, Last Jedi was at least interesting. I found Last Jedi to be interesting. There's a lot in it that's goofy, and I think this structurally, I have a problem with the Canto Bite thing, like a lot of people do. But it was an interesting film, and when I was watching it, I was definitely enamored of it, and I was immersed in it. Whether it was the best film in the world, that remains to be debated. But I just think that the whole sequel trilogy has been mishandled, not because of Kathleen Kennedy bungling it, but because of what Disney expected from their investment. And then they really needed to sit down and I think map out what they were going to do with Star Wars when they bought it. And when they bought Marvel had a production pipeline in place. Pixar had a production pipeline in place. Lucasfilm wasn't making films when they acquired it, and they had to put it all together. And it would have been, look, and here's another thing. The people like Bob Iger, he's a movie fan and all that, but he's not like a Star Wars fanatic. Bob Iger acquires Lucasfilm, but it's not like Bob Iger was this visionary who said, you know what we got to do? I'm going to mandate, I need a series of films that are Lord of the Rings in their scope and in their ability, in their storytelling. I need something that is going to be cohesive, and he needed to go for it. After spending $4 billion, as I talked about yesterday, they didn't want to take that risk and spend another $1 billion. They had to see if one worked. Bob Iger had something to prove. He bought Star Wars. He brought Star Wars back 10 years, a decade after the last Star Wars movie, and he made $2 billion. It was a victory. Bob Iger succeeded in doing what he needed to do, because from Bob Iger's standpoint, he's not a raging Star Wars fanboy bitching and moaning and complaining about what happened. In his mind, we won. Return of The Force Awakens was a huge. As a matter of fact, from a corporate standpoint, I don't think any movie in history can be considered as much of a victory as The Force Awakens. Now, I know people are going to, what about Avatar? No, I'm not talking about just monetary. I'm talking about the fact that Bob Iger invested $4 billion of his publicly traded company's money, $4 billion, and then turned that around. And the first thing they put out made $2 billion. That is an epic win. And whether you like Force Awakens or not, it does not matter, because from Disney's perspective, it's an epic win. There's a lot more to say about that, but yeah. Anyway, Suthius is here. He says, "Hey, Mr. B, Char's Counterattack is in theaters on December 5th. Is that true? Wasn't it already in theaters? Char's Counterattack was in theaters. By the way, Char's Counterattack, of course, where the new Gundam comes from, that Bandai new Gundam that's supposed to come out, it's $900. I'm obsessed with that. And then you have to buy the funnels at the Bandai, the Tamashii Nation's website. I didn't pre-order it. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. I need this Gundam. I need this Bandai new Gundam. Once I have that, I don't have to buy any more Gundams. It's like this 1/20th scale Valkyrie. It'll be the last. That, and I really want that Iron Studios statue and the Kid Robot 6-scale cockpit. And then I don't have to buy anything. Then my Macross or Robotech stuff is done for my life. I don't need to buy anything more. I've got what I've got. I'm done. I like that. I'm coming to the end of my road collecting things, which is cool. Because I'm gonna die soon, you know. Suthius says, starting Project Blue Book. Love me some UFO stuff. You know, it's funny, Suthius, when you say starting Project Blue Book, I know you mean the new series that Robert Zemeckis is producing, or maybe you don't. There is a classic series from the 80s, Project Blue Book, which I watched. And the thing about that series that used to piss me off when I was a kid, well, much younger, was the UFOs that they had in Project Blue Book. I knew exactly what model kits they took the parts from. And I'd be like, oh, that's, you know, a lot of Star Wars parts were on those UFOs. And they used to bug me. I'm like, why do you have to do that? Jackson Perez says, I'm not going to fight you. You're my friend. You're my mission. Then finish it because I'm with you till the end of the line. Kills me every time. Does that, wait, why am I drawing a blank on what this is from? And I know exactly what this is from, and I'm drawing a blank on it. It's, let me just look. Okay. I'm admitting that I don't know. Wow, that's really interesting. That's clearly not what I wanted to Google. Oh yeah. Well, of course, I'm with you until the end of the line. Yeah. Why am I don't know why was I not thinking what I was thinking something had to do with it was not Marvel. I was thinking science fiction or Star Wars or something, not Captain America and the Winter Soldier. Yes. So there you go. I love that stuff. Let's talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. No, I did not buy that 4K box set that's now selling on forever, but I do have all the movies on 4K finally. But yes, you got to love that. I mean, come on, Jackson. Who doesn't love that? And how did I know? Well, what an idiot I was. I was thinking Star Wars. I had Star Wars in my brain. I was not thinking the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But yeah, I mean, you know what's really funny? I really find the now we're seeing this backlash against the Marvel Cinematic Universe, especially because I keep trolling. I keep going out there and throwing things like, oh, the Snyder Cut, it's not as far along as you think. I don't think it is. And now all this stuff about how Marvel movies are pablum. And it's so weird to me because what the Marvel Cinematic Universe did was as far as comic books go, I mean, we're talking comic books. And I've read comic books my whole life, and I love them. And the Marvel Cinematic Universe has delighted me to no end. Every time I put on Infinity War, I could watch that. Every time I put on Winter Soldier, I mean, I love that stuff so much. Civil War. I just love the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And, you know, what I love about that is it turned out exactly the way it was supposed to. Sure, the early missteps, maybe Incredible Hulk and Thor: The Dark World aren't the greatest, but as a whole, it's a marvel of filmmaking. I mean, it really is. You gotta love it. And this weird backlash, it's not that good, I think is so odd. It's just so odd. I love the Marvel movies. I really do. I love them collectively. I love what they tried to do as a whole. I mean, I don't know if they're going to keep it going. I don't know if they can keep it going, but maybe they can. But who doesn't love them? And how did I not know what you're talking about? I'm sorry. Cardinal Sin is here. Cardinal Sin says, Laser Bob, I think the new characters in BB-8 had everything to do with marketing and not at all to do with story. I love the show. Well, Cardinal Sin, first of all, thank you. Thanks for supporting the channel. I agree with you. I mean, I think all of the characters were created specifically for their commercial and marketing appeal, which is ironic because, like, I have to tell you, like, I was watching a hot toy video from the Tokyo Toy Fair with Elizabeth this morning, and it was very funny listening to her saying, well, "Who is that? I don't like that." And it was delightful, and I like the fact that I can watch videos like that with Elizabeth, and she can actually give me commentary that I'm amused by, because it's interesting to see which character, like, she didn't like these Tron versions of the Iron Man suits. They've got these neon, they're called the neon tech versions. Basically, it's Iron Man meets Tron. They're not real. They're not, they just, Hot Toys made them up. And even Elizabeth is like, those aren't real, you know, those are made just to sell. And she's right. And I think that these characters in the sequel trilogy, the problem is there's no character development. Like, we're supposed to meet these people, like, fully realize, and I know, like, I don't want to take away from people that like them, but it's like you don't get to learn who they are. You don't get to understand or their motivations. They're just it's cutscene storytelling. It's like, here's our Star Wars protagonist. She's on this planet, and I mean, give me a character that's new and unique and interesting that I can get to know. And so she's scavenging around. I mean, I feel like it was all some shorthand, so I'm supposed to understand who she is. And I don't feel that I really did. And as we met her, there's all these weird choices. Like, why would she choose, if she's living on a planet that clearly has a hub of activity? Why isn't she working directly for anybody? Why doesn't she have a job? There are other people that have jobs. You know, why does she show up with these parts and you get half a portion? Like, what? It was so weird. I didn't buy it. I feel like I'm watching some made up thing that had no practical reality to me. But I think you're right. It was all about marketing. And by the way, it didn't work. None of the characters in those movies, we talk about Rey and Kylo Ren and all that, but none of those characters resonate with people the way the classical characters did. Alexander Wilson says, I would take J.J. Abrams over Simon Kinberg. Well, you might be right about that. I have to say, though, I don't think X-Men Dark Phoenix, while a huge crushing disappointment, was without some merit. I know, controversial. That's a hot take. But yes, you know, these characters, these guys like Simon Kinberg, and he's written a lot of stuff, gets involved with a lot of things. And these guys that get in the studio system and get to work that are decidedly mediocre. But they're studio friendly. I see J.J. Abrams as somebody who's been in the industry his whole life. Even as a kid, you know, he knew Spielberg and he's known these people for a long time. He's well regarded. He's well liked. But, you know, I think that I don't see a lot of storytelling talent. He was able to get by on his wheelhouse is one way, and I think what he's missing is painfully apparent. But I think both JJ, I mean, to me, JJ, both Star Trek and Star Wars suffered because of Bad Robot's involvement with both franchises. You know, I would rather have had, look, if JJ was if he had to direct, get somebody like Steve Zalian, who, you know, recently wrote the Irishman script, but he's an incredible screenwriter. Get that kind of a screenwriter to write something. I would love to see a great screenwriter take on some of these genre properties. And what would we get there? Somebody who's, you know, like Eric Roth or something. I don't know, but I just feel that the writing is where these things are really letting us down. John Suntress is here from the Word Balloon Podcast. For those of you who don't know, the Word Balloon Podcast is one of the great pop culture podcasts of all. And John Suntress has interviewed many people. It concentrates on comic books, but he talks to a lot of people about a lot of different things. So check out the Word Balloon Podcast when you can. John says, Spock was twice as good and still rejected. That's his character's obstacle. He never needed the emotions of Trek 09 or the Disco Lexia. Did you read Chabon's essay about Spock's smile cage mystery? BS. Yes, for what Michael Chabon talked about, that it was a lifelong mystery to him about why Spock smiled in the menagerie, later the cage. Like, you know, when he stops the plant life, you know, from going, oh, and then he turns and smiles. It was a production error because they hadn't figured out all of Spock's character traits yet, because it was the pilot. Now, here's what really bothers me. So they decided to take that aspect of Spock, one production mistake in what was the pilot episode, and decide to take a character that we've seen 50 years of stories about and turn him into something else. The way that Zachary Quinto portrayed Spock in Star Trek 09, and by the way, I don't blame Zachary Quinto. I loved him on Heroes. But the way Spock is written in Star Trek 09, and that there's this bubbling anger, Spock is not angry. I hated the way the character of Spock has been portrayed. between him and his relationship with Uhura and all that. It's so out of character. I mean, of all the stuff in Star Trek '09, making Kirk, what they did was, in my mind, what J.J. Abrams did in Star Trek '09 was take the pop culture, the larger pop culture opinion of Star Trek. Kirk's a womanizer. And just inject it into a movie, because let's make this swaggering douchebag who frivolously jumps into bed and gets into bar fights. I mean, there was such a fundamental lack of understanding of Captain Kirk's character in Star Trek '09. When I watched it, I'm like, what? Have you paid attention? Have you even watched an episode of Star Trek? Do you know what this character is all about? Because it seems to me when they sat down, and it's so funny that Bob Orsi was the big, Kurtzman and Orsi. Well, we know Star Trek, and I know, J.J. Abrams brought along all this stuff to it, but it's like if my mother were to sit down and write a Star Trek script, she kind of would have, because Captain Kirk's a womanizer guy, he's gonna ride a motorcycle like James Dean and all. I mean, it's such a fundamental misreading of the characters, and everyone's like, well, Carl Urban's just like Dr. McCoy, but that's all he is. He acts like McCoy at his most cliched moments. There's none of the subtlety, there's none of the depth or the feeling of, and I like Carl Urban. He was great. He was doing a great impression of DeForest Kelley, but the character of Dr. McCoy is not represented. It's all just cliche after cliche after cliche. There were some moments that were all right, but there's just a fundamental lack of understanding about these people that are given these franchises, like, let's come on and do it. And it's at the most superficial level. It really, but see, I'm trying to stay positive, but apparently I'm not doing a good job. But you know what? Can you blame me? Alan Miguel writes, I would really love to see a reboot of Three Ninjas for the big screen with Jet Li as Grandpa. Well, you know what? That's actually not a bad idea. I think that's Alan. I think you've definitely got something there. I'm into it. I think that's pretty funny. This letter comes from Christopher Morgan. Hello, our existential Mr. Rogers. Long time no letter. I'm so excited about too much we have to process in this, the Post-Geek Singularity. Too much because you open my eyes to things I can't avoid. Damn you, in the most respectful way. I've been collecting the X-Men run since House of X and Powers of X because I heard you talking about that amazing run. No regrets there, but it led me to find other stories that might appeal to me, which makes me wonder if you've read Superman Year One from Frank Miller and John Romita Jr. I have not. And also The Immortal Hulk. I have not. Can't remember who writes those. Both made me appreciate a character that I feel I've lost connections. Both made me appreciate a character that I feel has lost some connection with some. Just some recommendations from a fellow lover of all things Post-Geek Singularity. May you find all of the things you are striving for. Christopher Robin Morgan. Well, Christopher, it just warms my little heart when people tell me that they found something that they like because of this show. That's what we're all about here. That's what we're doing here, is to share our enthusiasms for all this stuff. And it's great. So I'm happy to hear you say that. Alexander Wilson says, I'm trying to watch Titans, but it's not working for me, and I think it's just bad TV. They forced a lot of plots. What are your thoughts on the show? Okay, I've only seen part of the first season. I haven't caught up with Titans. I was not digging it. Listen, I loved the Wolfman Perez run of Teen Titans, which is, classical. I mean, come on, finally, it's come out. I mean, I've been waiting for this. They solicited this and they canceled it. Now it's back out. Of course, now I've got to buy the other omnibuses that look just like this. But I have the first runs. I love Titans. And I'm just like, the thing about Titans is it was like the most everyday of superhero teams because, of course, Wonder Girl had her husband Terry. And I just felt that the show, I'm like, what? This is not the Titans that I would. You know what? You know what? If I made a Titan show, you know what I would. You know what I would have done. I would have said, I want what Friday Night Lights did for high school football and all the peripherals of high school. I want to make a superhero show. I want the Titans to be the Friday Night Lights of superhero TV shows. Not because I want to make it about football, but the kind of depth of character and the feeling that you have about all these people. And I would have made Robin like Coach Taylor. You know, Dick Grayson would have been the Coach Taylor of Titans. And I would have done that. I would have gone in and delved into the Wolfman Perez run. I would have updated it. I wouldn't have made it dark and edgy, but I would have made it as heartfelt and as emotional. That's what I would have done. I would have done Teen Titans, Friday Night Lights style. Who wouldn't watch that? But I agree with you, Alexander. It was disappointing. Suthia says, do you Panda Express? What is your go-to entree? I have a Panda Express within walking distance of here, and I have to say, I usually like their chickens, you know, what is it, orange chicken. I also like their grilled, like their teriyaki chicken, the grill. But I like to go and I like to get a fairly hearty bowl, or like a, you know, when you get the, what is it called, the container. I'll get 2 different chickens. I'll get maybe some you know, rice or something, shrimp. I do like their shrimp. But yeah, I have, look, is Panda Express the greatest food in the world? Probably not. But there's something very, very satisfying just about getting one of those cartons heaped to the brim with food and devouring it. I love it. I love Panda Express. What can I say? I like good Chinese food. I wouldn't call it good Chinese food, but you know, I have to say, that's being unfair. I've never gone to Panda Express and not been satisfied. Put it that way. I do like Panda Express. Stubble McShave says the twin sunset scene in Star Wars is probably the most important scene in Star Wars. It made us connect with the main protagonist on a fundamental level. You know what, Stubble McShave? I've often said that one of the great things about Star Wars is, first of all, when Luke goes up and he's standing watching the twin setting suns of Tatooine, and you hear John Williams, the French horn, that theme. Everyone knows, everyone's been there, man. Everyone's watched the sunset and wondering, you know, there's got to be more than this. Where's my future going? What am I going to do with myself? I don't know. And that's why I think you're absolutely right. And I'll tell you something else about Star Wars that people forget. Star Wars is about a farmer and a truck driver. Blue collar workaday dudes. Luke is a farmer. Han Solo is a truck driver. And they're blue collar guys. Man, these are not aristocrats. They're not royalty. They're just workaday guys, and they meet an old grizzled army veteran. You know, you might find it the VFW. These, we don't know. These guys are not special people. I mean, Obi-Wan was, but Luke, I mean, yes, okay, you can say, well, his lineage is special, but he doesn't know that. He's a farmer, and that's it. And when we meet him, part of the appeal of the movie is that scene, but also that Luke is a farmer. You know, he's not some guy. You can believe all of us are Luke Skywalker. Every girl and every boy is Luke Skywalker. I mean, you could say, sure, girls are going to look at Princess Leia too, but what I'm saying is that we are all workaday people that want to believe that there's something out there that is we're going to experience. And I think that's why Star Wars connects. And you get to see like Luke talking about his chores with his uncle. You know, I want to go to Anchorhead and get some power converters. Nope, not until you're done with your chores. I mean, everybody related. And that was part of it. I think that was part of the appeal. And these 2 guys, these workaday guys, kind of stumble into success with Obi-Wan's help and with R2 and 3PO's help. And that's what makes the movie so good. And that's why people love them so much. Wow, Mr. Mondragon. Hi, Rob. I'm disappointed with Hot Toys. No Shazam, Joker, Cyborg, and Justice League Superman. Been delayed each month. But a lot of Iron Man, neon armors, and Star Wars figures. Well, Hot Toys gotta eat. You know, Mr. Mondragon, what a cool name, by the way. I am with you. Like, I don't know if we'll ever get off-brand Hot Toys anymore. Like, I love the fact that they made Eric Draven as the Crow. I love the fact that they made RoboCop figures. I just don't know if, unfortunately, they're going to keep doing that because they're expensive to make, and they have to make the figures that sell. Classic Star Wars figures always sell. Iron Man figures have been big sellers for them. People love Iron Man figures. I understand. And by the way, their die-cast figures at $400 a pop are some of the most unbelievable action figures ever created. They're amazing. And they sell. People buy them. And I understand with that kind of pricing, I would love to see Shazam. I would love a Cyborg figure. I'm so bummed that we don't have a Cyborg figure. But, and where is the Justice League Superman? I don't know. I never bought a Ben Affleck Batman. I really want the armored Batman from Batman v Superman. I never got that. I'll get it one day on the secondary market. I do want to get that Justice League Batman. I didn't get the Justice League. I got to get the Flash. I got to get Aquaman. I have the only Justice League figure I think I have is Wonder Woman, but I do want to get them. But I feel you, man. There's that secondary Joker figure, that secondary market Joker figure that looks incredible. And why I think the reason that unfortunately the reason that Hot Toys didn't make a Joker figure is because he looked too much like a clown, like a regular clown. And how are they going to know that the movie was going to make $1 billion? I think that Hot Toys will, in fact, come out with a Joker figure, a Joaquin Phoenix Joker, because who wouldn't buy it? I mean, they always did well with their Batman figures, so I would assume maybe they will. I could see that happening. I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of torn. Should I get the Hot Toys Pennywise figure? I don't know. Probably not. But they made that, and they made a Beauty and the Beast Belle, but they never made the Beast. I mean, Hot Toys is kind of weird that way. Why did we only get 2 of the Watchmen? We got Silk Spectre and we got Comedian. No Night Owl, no Dr. Manhattan, and no Rorschach. I always thought that was kind of weird. But I mean, I get it. I understand. But yeah. Hot Toys, I still love them. Suthia says, if you could go back in time, would you do everything you can to be either a producer or writer or showrunner for a Star Trek platform, whether it's a TV or a movie? I don't know. I mean, I did write, when I moved to LA, I did write both a Star Trek story with my friend Jim Cole, and we wrote a script called First Impressions that we submitted that was rejected, a full script. And I did write a story that I really liked the story that I wrote, but I didn't know anything about television writing. So I wrote this outline. Well, it was not an outline. It was what would you call it? It was a synopsis of a story. It was like 10 pages of an episode that also got rejected, not from Star Trek directly, but from an agent who said that it wouldn't work. And I just didn't understand. I thought our Next Generation script that Jim Cole and I wrote, but mostly Jim Cole wrote it, but we came up with a story together, and was good. I liked it. I thought it was really interesting. It was a variation on what would happen if you left a communicator in Bella Oxmix's office, like we saw at the end of Piece of the Action, and what devastating results that might have on a civilization. And they later did stuff like that in later episodes of like Voyager and stuff. I don't know if I would want to go work on a Star Trek show necessarily. Because I'd rather have there are things I would have done differently in my career that would have made me much further along than I am now. I don't know if I would have had as much fun, but yeah, I mean, it would have been great to work on a Star Trek show. I would love to have, I guess so, but I also would like to have done a lot more original work. I mean, I still hope I can. I'm definitely going to spend the next decade. My primary focus is going to be making. I always thought I wanted to make at least 5 movies. I mean, as a producer, I'm a producer on the Agent Cody Banks movies, on Hills Run Red, and now on Tango Shalom. And I'm an associate producer, which I don't really count on the movie The Specials. But I always thought I would want to make at least 5 movies. I've only directed 1 movie, so my next focus is going to be I'd like to make 4 more movies and have like an oeuvre. I mean, I'd like to direct more, but if I can, I'd like to direct more movies if I can do that. Original stuff. Suthius says Titans season 1 was okay. Season 2 could have used more Deathstroke. Yeah, again, Deathstroke is, to me, it's the Titans' ultimate villain. And, you got to have Deathstroke. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you. This is going to be the end of Robservations, episode number 288. Of course, brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products for those men who want to look good and feel great. You can go to their website at getluckytiger.com. And if you punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity, you can get 20% off your order. They make great stocking stuffers, all of their products. I want to thank my moderators. I want to thank Jordy Lyons. I want to thank Lewis Yu, my new boys. My new moderators. I want to thank, of course, Detective Jim. I want to thank Greg Smith, who saw his 106-year-old grandfather yesterday. Wow. And I also want to thank, of course, the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden of Riverdale, Iowa, for just being the man who sets the tone. I also want to thank all of you supporters of the channel, both at the website, theburnetwork.net. Please go to the website. You can join up there. You can support the channel there. You can also send me things to the Imagination Connoisseur Gallery. You can send me a 3-word movie review about any movie you want. Send me a 3-word movie review about whatever obscure film. The more 3-word movie reviews we get up there, the better. And if you go there and you comment on anything, you will get entered into a drawing for a bottle of Lucky Tiger head to tail body wash, which who doesn't want that? I don't know. But I will be back on the John Campea show tomorrow. So that should be fun. And then, because it's always fun to be on the John Campea show as I'm looking for this. And then I'll be back here in the afternoon. So very excited to do that. It's another month, man. I can't believe 2019 is rapidly slipping away. But anyway, I want to thank everybody once again for supporting the channel. And remember, everywhere you go is someone. What am I supposed to say? Every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to all of you, watch tomorrow's game between the Vikings and the Seahawks. The Jedi Knights from the Pacific Northwest will emerge victorious. And with that, have a better day.